Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
That's confirmed open now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, members, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this morning's meeting to Fáilte Rómha Lig, our meeting with the Committee for Communities today. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off, mobile devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available there in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs are to be taken. May I remind members that about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices, switch all devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi. Please use tablet devices discreetly and in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of cameras used when using the tablet device. I would also remind everyone about the sensitivity of these microphones. So item 1, apologies. Are clerk aware of any apologies?
No.
Members aware of any apologies? No. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 2 then, Chairperson's business. So just to advise members that we will receive a briefing from RAISE in closed session at 12:15 today on public finance scrutiny, and I would encourage all members to remain for that if you can at all. Members, in advance of just to say, I suppose the Minister is here and he has generously offered to come on ahead in. If members would be content, we go straight to the Minister, let him get in and get his business done. So I could, before we ask the Minister, and I am aware of the breadth and the significance of the issues here, and I do think there'll be an awful lot to cover, so I would please ask members to be as succinct as possible. I will, as I normally do, try to divide the time equally so that members get an equal share. It's up to you how you use that. If I have to stop the session and move on, I'm going to have to do that, but it's really, given that the Minister's here today, I think it's really important today, and I'd ask members to work with that. So with the agreement of committee, then I'll go ahead and ask the Minister and the Permanent Secretary, who are both attending this morning.
Morning.
Morning all.
Morning.
Good morning. Members, thank you very much, and Minister, appreciate your attendance here this morning and the fact that we're getting started off in good time with yourself. So I'm now welcoming to our meeting this morning Minister Gordon Lyons and Permanent Secretary of the Department for Communities, Colin Boyle. So Minister, could I invite you to go ahead and make a brief opening statement, 5 minutes if you can, before we move to questions and answers, because I'm aware, as I mentioned to members before you came in, it's a department that covers an awful lot of things. Many of them very pressing, so I'm aware that members will have many questions this morning.
No, absolutely, and my original opening speech was about 35 minutes, but I want to reassure you, I've cut that down to 30. But no, look, I genuinely want to thank you for the invitation here today. I genuinely see this as an opportunity for us to work together. I fully respect the role of the committee to challenge me, to scrutinise my work, but I also think it's your responsibility to assist me as well, and I genuinely look forward to working together in that collaborative way. I've worked with you before, Mr. Chairman. You were chair of the Health Committee and I was the vice chair for 3 weeks, and we worked very well together during that period of time.
Didn't fall out once.
So yeah, I hope that we can continue on that. I do just want to briefly set out some of my priorities for my time in office. I am fully aware of the scale of the challenges that we face in this department. However, my ambition is to deliver policies and programmes that will have a real and meaningful impact. I want them to be deliverable, I want them to be sustainable, I want to make sure that we provide tangible and lasting benefits for people right across Northern Ireland. In short, I want to help people to improve their lives and well-being, and I believe that in this department we have the building blocks for a safe and healthy lifestyle for our people. Perhaps I could just give a little bit of strategic context at first. As you'll be aware, the budget position remains exceptionally challenging, but this is about doing the best that we can for people and communities within the available funding envelope. Progressing all of the priorities I'm about to outline will be heavily dependent upon our budget allocation for 24-25, but I'm also mindful of the need to deliver on the statutory obligations that we have, and those together with inescapable spend contribute to about 90% of last year's budget allocation, so that doesn't leave much room for manoeuvre, but I still have great ambition for this place. But it does mean that we need to look carefully at how every pound is spent to make sure it goes to those who need it most, to deliver positive impacts for people. So if it's okay, I just want to quickly go through some of the key areas, and I'll be happy to take questions. First of all, housing and homes. The provision of enough affordable, safe and warm homes is one of my key priorities. We're aware of the concerns around rent and mortgages, etc., but I want to make sure that we build more social homes, provide more quality housing options, support more people to live independently, ensure homes are safe and warm. We're currently reviewing the housing supply strategy. We are going to continue the social housing development programme. You'll be aware of the work that is ongoing in terms of safer residential buildings. We need to make sure that we keep addressing homelessness, which I have to say is a growing concern of mine right now, and especially you'll be aware of the issues around temporary accommodation. It's entirely unsuitable for families and has long-lasting impacts, and it's an area of huge concern for me. And I also want to make sure that we continue the Supporting People programme, which I've seen firsthand, both in my own constituency for many years and also since I've come into this role. It does a fantastic job in helping people live independently that, if we were not helping them, would be putting pressure on other government departments. You'll be aware of the anti-poverty agenda that I have. I'll not spend too much time on that because you'll be aware of the debates that we've had this week. I hope you've enjoyed spending so much time with me over the last few days, but you'll be aware that I am determined to address poverty in all its forms, and certainly we need to be addressing the root causes as well. So this will be cross-departmental, as so much of what I will be doing will need to be, but if we're interested in tackling the root causes of poverty, we need to look at childcare, we need to look at housing, we need to make sure that we're providing those opportunities for people to get into work and stay in work, and that is ongoing, as is the people and place strategy as well. And you'll also be aware of the great value that the voluntary and community sector bring to people right across Northern Ireland. That is something that I want to continue to support, and work is ongoing on that. In addition, we have other support available, such as the Make the Call service. That is really important, but for me in particular, I think that the fuel poverty strategy is really important in terms of tackling poverty. Far too many people spend far too much of their income on heating their home, and I think that we can make a real difference in helping to deal with that issue. The next issue of focus for me is around employment and disability. The Executive's disability strategy will be a key aspect of this work. We want to make sure that disabled people are able to exercise their rights and avail of opportunities as well. And one of the most effective solutions to poverty and towards inclusion is employment. And while we'll always be there to support those who are not able to work, I'm committed to progressing employment opportunities for all, and the disability strategy will be part of that. You'll be aware of Job Start and the huge benefits that has brought in terms of getting those that might not otherwise be in the workforce into the workforce, and the labour market partnerships have also played a key role in delivering that as well. In terms of sports infrastructure and active participation, I want to see more people more active more often, and there will be huge benefits if we can do that. So that work is progressing. Another key element is the delivery of our regional and sub-regional stadia programme and the National Training Centre. My ambition is to have a lasting legacy of top-class facilities to be enjoyed by communities and clubs in Northern Ireland. But another key issue for me is ensuring that we can help those that are underrepresented right now in terms of sport, those with disabilities and women in particular. And it's great to see how much there has been that increase in the number of women taking part in sport, in particular in football, in recent years. That's something that I want to foster and encourage, and to do that we need to have the grassroots provision as well. I am firing through this just because I'm aware of your time here. Culture, arts and heritage is another important issue. I know of the concern that exists, especially in terms of arts funding, and we all know the figures in comparison to the rest of the UK and Ireland. They don't tell the full picture, but it does show that there is a significant difference in spend. I'm a big fan of the arts and of sport in terms of how they can not only bring people together, but give people a sense of belonging, give people skills, give people the ability to achieve in other areas of their lives as well. And I want to support that as much as I can. We will be bringing forward the Culture, Arts and Heritage strategy. That will be a 10-year vision and strategy as well. I've already announced my intention to bring forward a sign language bill, and I think that's important for inclusion and full participation as well. And we'll also be doing further work in the cultural sphere in terms of our relationship with the United States. I think we have some very, very strong links there. President Biden referenced it. The UK government's recent command paper referenced it as well, and I want to make sure that we can take that forward and take advantage of those cultural links. So, Mr. Chairman, those are my, I suppose, overarching priorities. But I just want to say there are lots of other things that this department does that I still consider to be important. And if there's something that I haven't mentioned today, it doesn't mean that I don't recognise its value or importance, but I just wanted to give an indication overall of where I see some of the biggest challenges. There's other work to do in terms of urban regeneration, monuments in our state care, protecting and promoting our built heritage, the effective working of our ALBs. I suppose one of the final comments I would make is that so much of the work that I want to do will be subject to funding, and it will be subject to executive agreement. That's not to say that we won't do work, that we won't progress things at pace, but I hope that you can understand the funding constraints that I will be operating under. You will have heard about the budget difficulties that we are facing and the bids that have been made. I just want to be upfront with the committee, even if I were to get what others might consider to be a generous package in terms of some of our asks. That is still going to mean some very difficult decisions for the department to make. But I'm determined that we use the funding that we do have to make the greatest impact on people's lives. That's what I'm here for. I get into politics to help make things better, and I want to use the best use of our resources to do that. I genuinely want to have a good working relationship with you in order to achieve that. So I look forward to doing that and to taking your questions, but hopefully that explains a little bit of where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Minister. I really appreciate that, and that's been quite a high level whistle-stop tour across many of the areas. I suppose I agree with you. I want to say from the outset, like we have a very, very difficult financial situation, no question about that. I do think we need to address collectively that issue around the acknowledged now underfunding of the institution over a period of time. And also I think we need to look at how we can get the fiscal levers we need to do the things that we want to do. I do think that's crucial for us. So I want to touch briefly on a couple of the areas maybe that haven't been. I know members will probably pick up on many of the issues that you've covered. I know there's a huge interest in those. I want to just pick up on a couple that maybe weren't included. You'd mentioned the social inclusion strategy, you'd mentioned the disability strategy, but in terms of the gender strategy and the sexual orientation strategy, where are those, Minister?
So those are being taken forward. There's going to be a bit of time for me to get to understand some of the recommendations that are coming back. I think, in particular, when it comes to the gender equality strategy, the First and Deputy First Ministers have expressed the importance of violence against women and girls, which I think will probably tie in to that as well. You'll understand I'm 10 weeks into the job. There's lots to do within the department, but these are issues that I will take forward and get the feedback as well. I'm just going to turn off my phone in case that is me that is buzzing.
All members on airplane mode. Check the broadcasting.
Dead?
Yeah, okay. Okay, so go ahead. Your Minister, go ahead again, please.
Yes, I just think the other thing that's important in regards to all of the social inclusion strategies that had previously been floated is we need to have that engagement with stakeholders as well. Those that are the coalface of these issues are listened to. So we will examine those and take those forward.
Yeah, and keep committee updated would be useful if we can keep getting updated on those, just to keep track.
And I think on all of these things, I will keep you updated, and I'm sure you'll write to me if I'm not. But of course, anytime if there's more information that the committee would like, I'd be happy to provide that.
Thank you. And the Irish language strategy then?
Yes. So on the language strategies, I'm currently waiting for information to come back on that. I think there are reports that are being compiled on those. But you'll be aware that when it comes to the language strategies, there will be that element of executive agreement that's required as well. But we will keep you updated as we have more information on those.
And what, is that information coming from sector or consultation, or what is the information?
So the department has progressed work to develop action plans for the Ulster Scots Heritage and Culture Strategy and the Irish Language Strategy on behalf of the executive. I've been told that this will be available for my consideration shortly. That still needs to be discussed, I believe, with other departments and public bodies that would be affected. Hasn't come to me yet. When it does, I will consider, and then it'll be referred to executive for.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Minister, then I suppose the final one for me in relation before I go to members is around Euro 2028. Obviously a massive opportunity. I mean, this is one of the probably the top tournaments in the world, a real jewel in the crown. I think a real success story for both for the joint bid that has brought that in. This tournament has been in Berlin, Paris, all of these places, and it's now the turn for Belfast to get its share of that, and for the island of Ireland. Huge economic benefit, huge sporting benefits to flow from it. The AFA identify the 2.6 billion they have identified across the UK in economic benefits. And I was very struck yesterday by Jareth Bourne's comments in relation to the imagery, as Jareth put it, of the Northern Ireland soccer team playing in the European tournament in West Belfast in the GA Stadium, and the potential of the potential of all of that, and also the potential for grassroots clubs. And I think it's really important. We've had them in here before us. They have demonstrated value, and they've came back to us with figures about the value that they put into the community. So all of that is in play. Can you assure the committee that you will be able to secure the parts of the jigsaw that you have to secure to ensure that that tournament can come here?
Look, I agree with you on the potential of these sporting tournaments to bring economic benefit, and we'll remember the Giro before in particular. It was fantastic for my own constituency, as you had those pictures panned down the coast, and the feel-good factor as well that I think was brought. So certainly I see the economic benefit that can come from that as well. Certainly from my point of view, I recognise that I and the department is a player in all of this, but I am not the only player, and I think that there is some difficulty in terms of getting clarity in terms of the final funding allocations and where the money will be coming from. You'll be aware that there is an executive commitment, and that commitment remains £62.5 million for the redevelopment of Casement Park, £15 million from the GAA, and a contribution of €50 million from the Irish government. You'll understand that I'm not going to go in too much into figures and potential costs, other than to say that we've moved from the redevelopment of Casement Park to now talking about a Euros-enabled football stadium ready for that competition, and that has brought additional costs. There is a funding shortfall. I'm seeking clarity on that to see where is that right now, who are the other funding partners, what can be contributed, and then what are we short. I'm still trying to get that clarity and to get that information, and when I have that, we can then take the next steps. I recognise the commitment, and I do want to make it clear that commitment that was made by the previous executive and the funding that was allocated, that still exists. It's not sufficient to do what needs to be done for the Euros, and we await clarity on that from other funding partners.
And are you pushing and advocating with those other executive ministers the importance of all of that happening? And given the time is of the essence, are you confident that you have done everything you can do to have it as ready as you can?
Well, you're right to talk about other executive partners there, because someone that was in the Department for the Economy at the early stages of the bid, you'll obviously be aware that there's the responsibility for hosting will fall primarily to the Department for the Economy. But yes, from our point of view, we are trying to seek the clarity on where that money, on where that shortfall will come from. That will allow us to go to the next stage. But in terms of procurement, it's usual for us to have that funding clarity in place before we go further. That's what's missing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll go to members then. So at this point I have Sean, Brian, Kelly, Ciara, Andy, Daniel and Melissa.
Morris between Kelly and Ciara.
Morris between Kelly and Ciara. Okay, yep. Thank you, Clerk. Okay, so we'll go to Sean.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, Minister. I think I've seen you more than my own children this week. In terms, just picking up from what the chairman was speaking about there in terms of that regional piece, where's the tendering process at with Casement at the moment?
Well, you'll be aware that the department is now the contracting authority for Casement, but we're not able to go any further in terms of procurement until we have clarity on where the funding is coming from.
Surely putting the scope out to tender is how you will get that clarity, though. I don't understand how we're waiting for all the money to be in place before we put out the tender to find out how much we actually need. I think there's a wee bit of a confusion there in the jigsaw piece. Are the tender documents with you, and how long have you had them for?
So the when it comes to the funding that is required, we do have an idea of how much that is going to cost, because there have been market tested estimates that we have, so we do have that idea. But going out to a tender puts us on track for something that we may eventually then take financial. There might be a financial liability. There's certainly a reputational risk for us if we were to go out to tender and then not be in the position to award a contract. So it is normal for funding to be in place before you go out to procurements. That's what we're waiting to get.
And how long then have the tender documents then? Where are they at the moment? How what I'm trying to get at is that we have a 92-week build that has to be built 52 weeks before the tournament. we no longer have months of a wiggle room here. We have weeks before the entire viability of the UEFA is coming to, or the European Championship coming to Northern Ireland. So where is the blockage in terms of finding out exactly what you need to be able to put that tender document out, and what's the timeline?
Well, the blockage is getting clarity from the funding partners, including the UK government, on how much they are prepared to contribute to what will be the overall cost. That's what we're waiting on. I have asked the UK government for clarity on that. I believe that discussions are ongoing, but I haven't had any response to that yet.
Okay, but the discussions have been made in terms of all of the funding partners, and that's what we're waiting on.
The requests have been made to the UK
As I
government.
say, I'm just really worried that the blame will be on a procedural issue rather than anything else in terms of us actually getting this tournament in.
I don't see that as being. It's not a procedural issue that's the problem. It's the fairly fundamental issue of funding and where that's coming from.
Okay, I have one other then issue. It'll be of no surprise to anybody that I'm bringing up the arts.
Yep.
And I'm really slightly relieved to hear you talk about how you see the benefits of it. I think just really to push the fact that last year they had a 5% cut in the budget. I am so aware of the financial difficulties that your department is under. However, any cut to the arts sector in the next financial year will be a death blow. It simply is unsustainable. With a 5% cut, and anything further will be really disastrous. Can I ask where you are with pushing for that at the executive, and then will that feed into the culture, arts and heritage strategy?
Yeah, look, I appreciate you raising this. It's well documented. The figures quoted that we spend on the arts, roughly £5 per person in Northern Ireland. It's £10 in Wales and 25 roughly in the Republic of Ireland. Now that doesn't tell the full picture. That's just the arts council bodies themselves, and we contribute to the arts in different ways. But I think it sets out how stark this is. And look, you'll understand I have to deal with the budget for the whole of the department. But my view is that a little bit of money towards the art goes a very, very long way in terms of the overall budget that we have. I recognise the value of the arts, and the creative industries have been hugely important to Northern Ireland, and there are many individuals and organisations that are really feeling the pinch on this as well. There are going to be difficult choices to make right across the department, but I'm happy to assure people that I'll be making the case for the value and importance of all of the stuff that my department does, but in particular the arts, because I recognise how much they have been squeezed. And especially if you look back at the budget over the last 10 years, we're in a much, much worse position in real terms compared to where we were back then. So look, it's on my agenda. I recognise that it is serious. I mentioned it in my opening remarks, and until I get a budget, I'm not going to be able to give any more information on that, but I appreciate the strength of feeling on this.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Brian.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you.
Members, just Brian, before me, sorry for interrupting you, just to say you have 5 minutes each there.
Okay,
That's what you're working with.
That's quite fair, Chairman. So thank you, Minister, for your answers so far, for your presentation and the paper copy in advance. You've spoken already about housing, and you might be aware we've had presentations from a number of bodies highlighting housing needs in our recent meetings. So you'll be aware of the increasing demand across all sectors of housing, social, private rented and intermediate models. So I want to ask what specific actions or programmes can be delivered in the near future to meet that increasing demand for quality and affordable housing?
Well, I'm grateful to the member for raising the question, and housing is a top issue for me, because it is a pressing issue in and of itself, but also contributes to poverty, which is also another important part of the work that I want to do in this department. Hopefully you'll have seen some of the allocations that I have already made, which I hope emphasise the importance that I see in terms of housing. an additional £2.5 million to the Housing Executive Landlord this year, £3 million to the Supporting People programme. That's where I put the majority of the extra funds that I had towards the end of the now last financial year. Look, if we're serious about tackling housing, we need to take a very broad approach to this. That's why I'm going to be bringing forward a housing supply strategy to the executive very soon to get cross executive buy-in for some of the things that I want to do. And look, there's a number of things that we need to address. We need to continue building social homes. We need to make sure that we are refurbishing the housing executive stock that we have at the minute. Some of it's in terrible state of repair. I don't want that to have to go into disuse and fall away. We need to address the homelessness issues that exist as well. One of the things that I am keen, and I signed off on some instructions to officials on this actually this morning, is around the issue of intermediate rent. I think there are a lot of people in Northern Ireland that maybe aren't high up the list in terms of a priority for social homes, struggle to get into the private rented sector or to be able to purchase their own home or even to get co-ownership. And there is a space there in the middle for us to do something. So I believe the intermediate rent is a solution to help that group of people, in particular that low to moderate income. We use financial transactions capital to purchase homes or to build homes and give that discounted market rate rent. So I think that's a new innovative way that we can use financial transaction capital to actually deal with this list. But I'm determined that we'll build more social homes, but as well we have to make it easier and cheaper to build homes. So we need to seriously address the wastewater issue in this country, which is really creating a drag on the building of homes. We need to look at our planning system. We need to look at local development plans and make sure we're zoning enough land for housing. Some of that is within my gift. Most of that will be cross-executive, but I'll be making the case at the executive that this is a top priority for so many of the other things that we want to do as well. If you give someone a good home and that good start in life, it improves their educational attainment, it improves their health outcomes. It deals with so much of the other pressure that we see right across departments here in Northern Ireland, and it's something that I'm determined to do my best to address.
Yeah. Well, I want to welcome, Minister, that you're going to highlight the water drainage issues at the executive. I think this has to be seen not as an issue just for the Department for Infrastructure, but very much for the executive. It affects every department, but particularly your own. And we've been hearing that. We're all aware of that. Developers and positive developments that are held back or just made unviable due to the high connection costs and extra connections developers need to build. So I'm aware my time is running out. Chairman, I think I've time for one more.
As ran out, you can ask the question.
Right.
It'll have to be a very short answer.
Briefly, if I can, then just one of the issues been raised with us is about energy efficiency in homes. And can you outline briefly, are you hoping to continue with the boiler replacement scheme, which is a benefit to social housing?
Massive issue. If we make our homes more energy efficient, better health outcomes and positive impact on incomes as well. So what I want to do is continue to develop a new affordable warm scheme, and there should be an element within that for boiler replacement. And I think that we can make homes more energy efficient. We can allow people to spend less money on heating their home, and then at the same time contribute to some of the targets that we have as well. So yes, absolutely, a boiler replacement could play a part in that, but that will all be subject to final approval.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Kelly.
Thank you very much, Minister and Permanent Secretary. Minister, whenever you came into post, there was a fanfare. Thank goodness we had the Assembly back. But at that time, you said that housing and boosting employability and promoting regeneration were going to be keys to yourself. I want to get down into the dirty detail of this rather than talking about strategies. I want legislation. So can you outline to us what your legislative programme will be for the rest of this mandate? Because we will be working in partnership with you to help to deliver that.
Yep, absolutely. So obviously you will be aware first of all of the defective premises legislation that I intend to bring in. That's important. I'm looking forward to being able to make a real change there for people in terms of issues that have affected and have the potential to affect other people as well. There will be a number of pieces of benefit and welfare related legislation that I intend to bring in. Look, there's going to be other pieces. I'd be happy to provide more detail near to the time on that, but I would just say this to the member. Legislation has its role to play, but I actually believe that so many of the issues that we face can't be addressed by legislation alone. For example, yes, absolutely, the sign language bill that I want to bring in, I think, can create that positive change. There will be some other pieces of legislation that I want to bring in terms of some of the housing issues that we want to address. But really, I think the most important thing will be cross-executive support and collaboration on these key issues. So on the housing, we can sort out the wastewater issue. We can agree a budget for social homes. If we can do those things together, it doesn't require legislation, requires funding and working together. I think that will be the bigger challenge than the legislation itself.
Well, just on that then, we've agreed as an Assembly in previous mandates for a housing outcome. Can you outline the progress that's being made towards that in the programme for government?
Yes, I think that is important. Obviously the discussions are ongoing with the programme for government, and I don't want to move ahead of that. But I hope in my presentation today as well, my answer to Brian's questions, that I have emphasised how important housing is, first of all, and secondly, how it will require that cross-departmental, cross-executive working together. So I am hopeful that this will be a priority for the executive as well. I will certainly be pushing for it to be one.
It's certainly one I think us as a committee will be looking for, because it'll address that water, wastewater and so many other things that are outside of your control. A couple more questions, so I'm going to be quick. One is on legislation, hybrid council meetings legislation. Will that be coming forward? And the second one then is a place that's in my heart, is about people with disabilities who are the furthest from the employment market, and what your intention is, what supports you're going to put in place for people with disabilities to reduce that high rate of inactivity.
Yes, so first of all, on the hybrid councils, that was something that I had said I always wanted there to be that provision. I think there was some misunderstanding in some way. I was taking this away and that was going to end it. That was never the case, as I said in my letter to the committee and to each of the chief executives of the district and borough councils. I think it's an important provision to have. There are certainly ways in which I think that it should be used and shouldn't be used, but ultimately I felt that was best for the councils to decide themselves under the proper legislation that had been brought forward by my predecessor. That can be done in a very short space of time, and I expect that to be done now within certainly weeks. I think that we're well progressed on that, and I should be hearing back on that soon. I'm really pleased that the member has raised disability, because that's an issue very close to my own heart as well, and essentially I want to make sure that disabled people in Northern Ireland are encouraged to participate in public life. I want them to have their voices heard. I want to promote positive attitudes towards disabled people as well. What I would say is that I will be bringing forward the disability strategy, and there are a number of things that I want to make sure that we're addressing in that. So there will be a role there to make sure that we have adequate housing for those that are disabled, that they have access to transport, that they're able to get access to employment, to education, to leisure, and importantly that they have access to public services. So we are developing that strategy. There's a very long list of consultees that we're working on to co-deliver that. I want to take into consideration the views of all stakeholders on that, but ultimately that will be subject to public consultation and to executive agreement. The member has an interest in this, Mr. Chairman. I'd be very happy to hear from her in writing or at another time anything that she thinks that I should be doing on that.
I think that access to employment piece is key for people with disabilities. I think living in poverty on benefits is not what anybody wants, that they do want to have access to good and fair employment. Yeah.
When you see the statistics around, I know the Harkin Institute has done fantastic work, but it's simply not acceptable in my view, and I want to do what I can to address that.
Okay.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Kelly. I'm going across now to Morris.
Thank you very much, Chair, and as always, I will attempt to be as brief as I can. Minister, thank you very much for your time coming here today to present to us, but I'm going to ask you a question. I'm sure you'll not be surprised with my background, and that's to give us some detail on the sub-regional stadia funding, which has been agreed, I don't know how long, but has never been delivered. So what are your plans to roll out the sub-stadia money as soon as possible? Clubs are waiting on it, including my own hometown of Coleraine and Upland Institute need a new ground.
Yes, so I think the first thing I would say is that you're absolutely right to mention the length of time that this has taken, and the clubs have been waiting for this. That's why as soon as I came in to post, I wanted to make sure that we were pushing this forward as long or as quickly as possible, because people have been waiting so long for it. Since 2011 announcements were made and we never got that progress being made. I've been pleased to visit a lot of the clubs that could potentially benefit from this funding right across Northern Ireland. In fact, I have an invite to go to Coleraine from yourself. I look forward to taking that up soon, a place that's very familiar to me, and I recognise that there's a huge demand out there. I recognise that £36.2 million does not go anywhere close to meeting the final need that we have, but that money's been there for a long time. With each month that goes by, it's losing its relative value. So I want to get that out there as quickly as possible, and I'm now considering options for how we take this on, and I hope to be able to have an announcement on that very soon. Again, that's more progress. We're getting closer to being able I hope to deliver real change on this. And this is important, and I will be going and asking for additional resource. This is a longer term programme. What's really struck me as I've visited all of the clubs is that this isn't just somewhere where Premiership or Championship teams play on a Saturday. So many of these clubs are used in some cases nearly every single day of the week. They are community facilities. They are helping encourage young people get involved in sport. So I recognise the importance of it. I want to emphasise that, and I hope to have an announcement on that soon.
Thank you very much, Ministers. I'm sure you know clubs have evolved greatly over the past 20 years to become community hubs rather than one day a week visits. The other question, with your permission, Chairman, is around your anti-poverty strategy and the pressing need for low-income working family households. Have you any thoughts on that? You touched upon it briefly during your presentation, but you didn't really give us any details.
Yeah, I'm happy to expand on that a little bit. I think poverty is a stain on our society, especially the high rates of poverty, in particular child poverty, that we have, which, yes, may not be as bad as other parts of the UK, but they're still far too high here in Northern Ireland. And I would just emphasise, and I know I'm probably going to sound like a broken record on this, but so much of what I want to do and what I want to achieve will require genuine cross-departmental, cross-executive working. So some of the things that I want to see tackled in terms of poverty, housing, as I've already mentioned. Secondly, really important for working families is childcare. Now, I don't want to intrude on the responsibilities of another minister. I know that Paul Given is working at pace to bring forward proposals on that can get the support and fully funded support of the executive. But childcare is essential to tackling poverty as well. We need to do better at supporting working families in Northern Ireland, and childcare is a huge part of that. We need to address employment and employability. We need to get more people into work. We have a large section of economically inactive in Northern Ireland. One of the best ways to get out of poverty is to get into work. As I said, we'll always support those who cannot get employment or who are unable to work, but we need to provide the pathways to getting people into employment as well, and that's really important for me. The fuel poverty issues that I've mentioned before, we can give people some money to help with energy bills every year, but I think a better way to help people is actually make their homes more efficient and enable them to better heat, insulate their homes rather than just pay it. So when it comes to an anti-poverty strategy, I will be looking for those things that actually go to the root causes of poverty rather than short-term fixes. They may be necessary, but it's, for me, the root causes of poverty are the ones that need to be tackled. I'd be happy to give a further briefing to the committee at some stage on that if it would be helpful.
Thank you very much, Minister. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and we're going then to Ciara. Go ahead, please.
Thank
Deputy
you, Minister.
Chair.
Thank you, Colin. Just kind of 2 areas I'll focus on, because I know a lot of questions have already been asked. Folks, first and foremost is addressing homelessness, and we're well aware, even the debate in the Assembly, we are in crisis. We have thousands of families in dire need in temporary accommodation, and then likewise the crucial impact that's having regarding the budgets over the last 10 years in relation to supporting people and those that are doing tremendous work and supporting our most vulnerable. So I'm conscious of the demands that are going to be placed on your budgets. So I want to make a statement more than anything to re-emphasise how critically important it is to be investing in our frontline services, and particularly those supporting people programme. And if you can, any comments on it, that's fine. And then likewise, and as Colin, as you mentioned, that's in your presentation, it's great to see regarding people in place. Neighbour renewal has been critically important to areas of disadvantage in our community since 2007, and it is a strategy that I think has worked well, particularly through the Department of Communities and the work that has been done there, and it's about continuing investment. I'm conscious if there's groups listening, the staff are currently sitting on a 3 months extension, although it was quite welcome. It's a continuous annual over the last 10 years vulnerability with the staff are being hemorrhaged within organisations. So it's emphasising the 2 areas of neighbourhood renewal and supporting people. They're critical programmes, and they need uplifts not only in salaries, but they need continuous and additional investment. So that's just a comment I want to make, so you can comment on it. And then core question is around the legislation that Kelly had mentioned, Private Tenancy Act, private rented sector reforms. Where he's on that, particularly in relation to affordability and housing standards. That's 2 key areas, and obviously from our last mandate we were able to progress some, but we have a long way to go. So just, is there any movement in that, investment in that? And then particularly then, given our Assembly debates this morning, notice to quit, just to confirm that this work will go on ahead alongside the consideration of banning no-fault evictions. So that's kind of the 2 areas. Yeah. Thank you.
Just to address your first comments, the Supporting People programme is fantastic. I've really been encouraged by what I have seen, and I think it's an example of where a relatively small sum of money can be spent to help people stay in the type of accommodation that they would rather be in, rather than more money being spent to send them to a type of accommodation that they might not want to be in. Fantastic work with vulnerable people, fantastic work with some older people as well. I had a fantastic afternoon with some older people in East Belfast, so I'm a very strong supporter of that programme and absolutely want that to continue. In terms of neighbourhood renewal, I was recently actually in the members' constituency on the Waterside, and I got a very frank update on the yes, absolutely, the good work that they do, but the challenges that they face as well. And we have great people doing excellent work in those areas, a lot of diversionary work as well with young people and in youth clubs, and supporting people right across the community. But they are being squeezed right now in terms of their salaries as well. So look, you'll understand that I can't sit here and ring fence everything that everybody has asked me to, but I do recognise the impact that it has. And again, I would emphasise so much of what we do in this department is spending money well that actually prevents greater impact on the public purse and other departments later on. In terms of the legislation that she had mentioned, yes, absolutely. Look, I take note of the debates we had this week in terms of the private tenancies and the longer notice to quit periods. That work does continue because I'm under a legal duty to do that under the, I think that was your amendment under the Private Tenancies Act. So we're committed to doing that. That does not stop us recognising the resource constraints that my department is facing. That doesn't stop us from doing that work then at the appropriate time. I would just emphasise that when it comes to the no-fault eviction issue, there is considerable work in that. because it's a very complex issue because of the exemptions that can be put in place. You'll be aware of I think it's 18 different exemptions that exist in Scotland. So there's a significant amount of work, because if we're to bring that in, we need to make sure that it does what we want it to do, and it doesn't actually make things worse, but that will continue.
And I have another 1 wee minute, just because I know it hasn't been mentioned here, and just the advisory panel on community wealth building. Obviously, what progress, if any, has been made, because I think that is another innovative way of how we can utilise resources across departments to more effectively have an impact on our most vulnerable. So is there any updates from that?
Fantastic, and I've seen examples of that in my own constituency, and actually how that is and the impact that excuse me, the impact that could have later on. I'm more than happy to send a proper written briefing on that, just to show exactly. I don't have precise timelines for you, but I'm happy to give that in terms of a briefing.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you. And Minister, just to pick up on a wee point in that in relation to community wealth building and the role of local government and how they can play a part in all of that. In terms of the regeneration powers to local government, can you give us a wee quick outline on that, or can you include that as a briefing back to committee?
Yeah, I'm happy to include that as a briefing to the committee. We've been back and forward on that for a while in this college.
Yeah, well, we discuss it regularly at Permanent Secretaries Group with Solus as well. So it's there's a bit of work going on between us at the minute, where we're asking Solus to kind of define what they mean by regeneration powers. So we sort of want to really understand what that is. Regeneration can mean an awful lot of things. So there's an ongoing dialogue process as well. So PSD Solus is working very well, and that piece of it is on the agenda there. So, and we can provide you more detail, as Minister says.
Yeah, that'll be useful. Thank you. Going now to Andy. Go ahead, Andy, please.
Thanks, Chair. And I'll try to be brief, Minister. Can we just jump very quickly back to the standalone housing outcome? And I appreciate, obviously, you've quite clearly set out that housing is a firm commitment of yours moving forward in this mandate. But obviously, given the cross-departmental nature, and that obviously I've had the hindsight of sitting on this committee for a while, that all housing organisations are in support of that standalone housing outcome. Minister, can I ask for your views of that? And are you pressing for its inclusion in the programme for government?
Look, I don't want to go into the discussions that I'm having with executive colleagues around the programme for government. What I can do is emphasise, which I hope I already have done this morning, how seriously I take this issue. I do not want us to get into a situation, because we're bad at the minute, but I don't want us, in terms of our waiting list, etc., I don't want us to get into a serious crisis as exists in other parts of the UK and Ireland. I also want to emphasise how important it is that we have a genuinely cross-departmental working in relation to this. So, look, I hope you'll understand I can't get into specifics of what's going or what might not be in the programme for government, but I hope that I've outlined to you how important I take this issue and how I recognise that it does require genuine cross-departmental working.
Appreciate that, Minister. And you had mentioned in response to another member, we're likely to see benefit and welfare legislation coming forward as part of your legislative programme. Is that likely to include new welfare mitigations as outlined in the Welfare Mitigations Review Panel report?
So many of the pieces of legislation that I will have to bring forward will be in relation to keeping the parity principle, so we don't get into a situation where that we're left behind. It's a considerable amount of work, and I know in your committee you'll be putting through many SRs and different pieces of legislation in that. In regards to the welfare mitigations, as it said in the chamber on Tuesday, that report will be coming to me, and then I will be taking that up with the executive and discussing the way forward on that. That obviously will be funded this year. It's important that those welfare mitigations continue, but after that I will require executive agreement. But on everything that we do, I want to make sure that we are spending the resource that we do have in the areas that will make most difference. So I recognise there are additional requests in terms of welfare mitigations. I'll be frank, we will not have the budget to do all of those, but I am prepared to look at and say, of all the interventions that we have, current and proposed, what are the ones that we can deploy which will actually make most of a difference?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Minister. And another area that obviously you've highlighted and you said as a priority is tackling the root causes of poverty. And obviously you'll be quite familiar with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund in your previous ministerial role, and many organisations and the employability services that they're providing through that. Have you had any engagement, Minister, with UK Government and other departmental colleagues for that fund or an alternative fund post March 25?
You'll be aware that the issue of EU replacement funding and shared prosperity is a matter primarily for the Department of Finance first to take forward. You'll be aware, obviously, of our disappointment in terms of some of the things that we haven't been able to do and the different changes that have taken place. But look, of course, we'll continue to work closely with the Department of Finance and other executive departments to seek to influence the UK government on their direction of travel. I was recently at the East-West meeting of ministers in London a few weeks ago, and all Northern Ireland ministers emphasised the importance when it comes to UK government funding that we recognise the priorities of the Northern Ireland Executive and the UK government, try and get those to match up, make sure that we're not duplicating what we are doing, but it's really important that the resource goes to those projects that can get the most benefit from them. But so much of that will be dependent on those conversations between the Department of Finance and Treasury.
Just one final question, Chair. Obviously, there's been a lot of focus on the disability strategy, and as somebody who's disabled myself, obviously, I want to see something that is ambitious, robust, and importantly deliverable. Quite often, it's been highlighted that strategies have lacked resource in the past, and it's important that the resource is available for the broad suite of strategies that we're going to see coming forward. Minister, can I ask you to obviously make sure that this is included as part of any strategy? It's often raised with me as somebody who has the ability to engage in disability sports that the range and depth of disability sports available for those with disabilities in Northern Ireland is somewhat lacking in comparison with the rest of the United Kingdom, and it's regularly raised with me that the availability isn't there. So if that's something that you could look at moving forward.
Absolutely. In fact, I've already raised with executive colleagues the need for us to ensure that if we do get executive support for a strategy, that we're prepared to put the funding towards that. I don't think that there is anything that causes more frustration among the general public is when politicians say, oh look, we've got this plan, we're going to do something, but you don't allocate the funding necessary to actually get it done. So I have emphasised that point to executive colleagues that we're all, and my department probably more than most, will bring forward a number of strategies, but we need to be prepared to contribute the funding towards those. Absolutely take up your point as well. I think it will be a key part of the disability strategy. I talked about access there to employment and to public services. I mentioned sport as well. That's really important. For me, as I said in my opening statement, there is under-representation among some groups. Disabled people are included in that, and we need to make sure that we have the facilities as well to make sure that they can take part in sport. That's what I'm committed to doing as well.
Minister. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Minister. Dan.
Thank you, Chair. And Minister, you're very welcome, as are you, Colin. There's a number of pressing issues that have been touched on already, but I want to point to correspondence received from yourself, Minister, in response to a question I asked about the Housing Executive Right to Buy scheme for tenants. I received two responses to the one question, one that was redacted and one that was not. The one that was redacted said, at present I have no plans to bring forward legislation to end the Northern Ireland Housing Executive's house sales scheme. I will consider whether to keep this issue under review and establish ministerial priorities. And in the actual response that I received shortly after, I have no plans to bring forward legislation to end the Northern Ireland Housing Executive Sales Right to Buy scheme. So which is your position? Is it the case that this is legislation that will be forthcoming, or has there been a change of position in relation to it? If there has been a change of position from the previous minister, then surely that's contradicting your position in recognition of the crisis in housing at the present time.
So, well, first of all, nothing has been redacted in that answer. There was an initial response that was provided to me. This was an administrative error. I changed the answer to more accurately reflect where I was, where I am on this issue. That was an administrative error. I know you're keen to highlight it, and you've highlighted it at the committee before, but at this moment in time I don't have any plans to change the right to buy scheme for the housing executive. I still think it's important that people can have the ability to buy their own house. I'm always open to listening to other people's points of view, but we shouldn't think that if we were to end the right to buy scheme either, that would in some way end some of the problems that we have in terms of social housing. I'm still determined that we build more and build more social homes. I'm taking an extra step in terms of the intermediate rent as well to move that forward.
I appreciate your honesty, Minister, and it does signify a change of position from the previous Minister, because in response I had from the previous Minister, the intention was to end that scheme. So there is a formal change to that position. I might add that it is of concern to officials within your own department that that scheme is still in place, given the huge demands for social housing and the difficulties in actually delivering new builds. I'll put that firmly to you. Minister, a further question is also, do you intend to enable the housing executive to borrow money so that it can build more social houses? And I'm sure that you'll recognise, if that was indeed enabled, there'd be significant benefits to curb or at least relieve some of the real pressures that exist in accessing social housing in Northern Ireland.
I think we need to look at funding models, yes, for the housing executive. This is something that I am progressing, not just in terms of new builds, but also in terms of the refurbishment of property. I think it's a significant concern for me that some of our properties are in such a state that it's possible that they may go out of use altogether if that investment isn't there. That would be a real tragedy if we are losing the ability for people to live in homes because they've got so bad. So we have to look at alternative funding models for the housing executive, and that is something now that I'm actively pursuing.
I'm relieved to hear that that is something you're reviewing, and the committee, I'm sure, will be keen to hear updates on that progress, because I do think it could resolve quite a lot of the problems.
I'm relieved to hear that. I'll have your support on that, yeah, because genuinely I think that could be a game changer in terms of provision.
Just in relation to, I know you're aware that I've raised this continually in relation to staffing within your department. There seems to be a particular issue in retention and recruitment. At present, there's 880 temporary promotions that exist as well. Is this figure not excessive, is the first thing? And what targets have you set in reducing this over that time frame? And further to that, and directly related, why is there so many agency staff, and is this cost effective in terms of best value for money?
Yes, look, you've raised these issues before, and I think you're right to raise them. If you don't mind, I'm just going to hand over to Colm on this one. It's responsibility for staffing issues.
Yeah, so I have a letter. I sent off a letter yesterday to the Minister to come to yourselves, probably with you already, I think, at this stage. So just in terms of the last time I was here, I don't think you were here, I talked about the need, the optimal level of vacancies we've got in terms of our work study. That we actually requires about 1,128 to be exact. We've got 792 vacancies at the moment, and we've 880 TPs, temporary promotions. So it's not one for one. People are on maternity leave, we need to cover posts. People are on projects, we need to cover posts. I would say to you that running an organisation of the size of 10,000 people, where you have a flow in and a flow out, the flow out's becoming particularly problematic. And one of the things we've seen through COVID has been a lot more people leaving. So we're losing about 26 staff a month. Our age profile is quite old. Our agency staff are very young and highly capable. Our older staff are also highly capable, but very experienced. And as they start to leave, it can be very difficult to fill some of those positions very, very quickly. And one of the reasons being we haven't had supply lines until November 2023. So it was a long period of time where A, there was a moratorium in recruitment, and then B, competitions weren't being run, whether it be COVID or whatever reason, but they weren't being run. And that's some of that details in the letter in terms of when the last time we had a grade 7, grade 6 competitions and so on. We're getting into more of a supply situation now. We report regularly to the NICS board, to the head of the service, and to that board, and we all share our number of temporary vacancies, temporary promotions. So the 880 that you refer to is pretty much in the median of the range in terms of where all the departments sit. So we're about probably third or fourth in the league table in there, if you want to put it that way. Temporary promotions are a very valuable instrument for us, if I'm honest. Most of our staff do frontline jobs, very difficult, stressful frontline jobs. And there are times where we are a very hierarchical structure as well. So you've got, for example, if you take a jobs and benefits office, you have a staff officer in there, maybe over 100 people, and there's layers within that where people are in cells. So in those cells, you could maybe be managing 20 people or 10 people or whatever. So you need a level of knowledge and you need a level of experience to be able to do that. So when
I'm going to have to keep you moving on there.
We
do have the letter, and we will be coming back to this.
Okay, when we can't recruit, we need to be able to temporarily move people to provide the continuity of service. And sometimes we go beyond the 1 year time frame because we don't have anybody from a recruitment point of view to put them in there. So that's really what the issue is. This is very much a necessary piece in our armoury. And I can say to you without fear of contradiction, during COVID, if we hadn't had temporary promotions, we wouldn't have got through it. So we wouldn't go through it. I'm very happy to come back here, by the way. When you've read the letter, I'm happy to come back and
I guess we'll be coming back to. Thank you, Daniel. Well, Lisa, go right.
Just fair in the future area, I was wrote Colin Foster. You're very welcome, Minister, and to you, Colin, as well. I've met with you on a number of occasions just in relation to different issues. And I won't harrow what has already been ploughed. In fact, many of the areas people have related to here in terms of hybrid meetings and the likes of it was one of the issues that I wanted to raise. But another issue that's very important, in particular to the council that I used to be a member of, the Irish Citizens Demand Council, and that's the reinstating again too of the rate support grant. Is there any indication, we'll say, of the likelihood of that happening, Minister, or anything else been put in its place? Because I would say too that it's a win-win situation in terms of addressing even issues like poverty, because the very people who will benefit from it in that particular council area, in fact, are those that are probably struggling at the minute to meet rates and the likes of it.
Yes, absolutely, and that's always the problem, isn't it? Whenever you go last, that all of your questions have been taken already. But I recognise the concerns that have been expressed over the rate support grant. It's something that I've had correspondence on from a number of councils. The rate support grant is statutory, but it's discretionary in amount. It's not ring fenced, and again, that's going to be subject to all of the other budgetary issues that I'm facing in the department. We've heard, I think most people have raised the issue that's going to require departmental spend. So I have to balance those all up against each other. There's no easy choices because I am well aware of the pressure that some of the councils are under in particular. But certainly if funding does become available during the financial year, I will consider that in the context of my other funding priorities as well.
Thank you, Minister. A couple of wee ones just to pick up on the issue around the right to buy. The Housing Executive has told committee that they consider that an issue for the Treasury. So just what's your thoughts on that? That the right to buy, or on the borrowing issue.
So that's where some of the difficulty lies at the minute. I'm working with executive colleagues on that to take that forward. We don't have the power in and of ourselves to change those. It's essentially to do with public borrowing against whether it contributes against public sector borrowing or not, and that's where some changes might need to come into place to enable the Housing Executive to borrow, but that engagement is ongoing with Treasury.
Thank you. I'll come back to you in a second on this.
No, would it be possible, not now, but maybe get an update of them ongoing, because I know from prior to the last mandate there was ongoing liaison with the UK Treasury regarding the options paper and the budget, so it would be useful to get an update, but probably in writing maybe.
So some of it is, but that's been taken forward through. I mean, DOF have to do the Treasury interface, so we feed through into them and they take that forward. So we'll have a wee look at that as to how best way to brief you. But it is sensitive, and there's just a level of confidentiality around some of it in terms of what's happening. So.
And just to say on the right to buy issue, we have heard at committee as well from the housing associations around they consider that a key action in terms of building and protecting the social housing stock. So I think it's something that committee will want to engage further with you on that issue. One other issue hasn't been raised at all, and I do welcome the fact that the Minister has, I think, is going to meet with the all-party group on gambling, and an important issue. I have attended some of their events, a very, very thorough committee and all-party group, in my opinion, and I've learnt from their work some of the huge, really worrying figures around young people and gambling, and online gambling in particular, including the impacts in terms of suicide. So it's really at the most serious end of it. And we've talked about the benefits of sport, but this is one side where there is potential issues around that. So can you give us any update in terms of the gambling legislation?
Yeah, so I am going to be meeting with the all-party group soon. I think I've certainly accepted the invitation because I recognise just how harmful that is to people, and your party colleague has raised that issue publicly as well in a very good way. So much has changed, especially with the advent of the internet. It makes me sound very old when I say that, but obviously things have changed considerably in the last number of years. We've had the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Amendment Act. We received royal assent in 2020, and that's bringing some much needed change. There is a wider piece of work to be done in terms of gambling reform. Though that's a significant piece of legislation that would need to be done. In fact, I think it'd be one of the biggest pieces of legislation.
The biggest ever.
The biggest ever piece of legislation that would have come through the Assembly. So look, I'm considering options around that. There are some other things that we can do in the meantime. That more fundamental piece is on a much longer timescale.
Thank you. And I would, I suppose, on behalf of the committee, just to say the accelerated passage on the defective premises is going to curtail committee scrutiny. So if we can see that as soon as possible within the time frame.
Just would like to. I appreciate the support of the committee on that. This is an urgent issue. We want to deal with that disparity, and I appreciate. I don't like accelerated passage. I genuinely want the Assembly to have their say, but in this instance, I do appreciate I think all party support for that.
Thank you, Minister. I'll just mention this one because it hasn't been mentioned. I know it's an issue that you yourself have mentioned and have said that you are, but it will, just because we didn't get to it, rural housing need. Obviously, there's so many housing issues, but rural housing needs really pressing one as well. So listen, Minister, thank you for your time. The committee does appreciate the fact that you've give us that time this morning here. I think we've covered a lot of issues, and certainly I believe that we will be looking forward to engaging with you further on issues of interest to the committee and in terms of our role in that, all of that. So thank you, Permanent Secretary, and thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All the best. Okay, members, so we'll do a wee quick run around just if there's anything arising from that members want to flag up as additional questions at all.
Well, I think there's a number of things there, Chair. The Minister seems to be slightly at odds with some of the concerns of the Housing Executive in relation to right to buy, and also officials from his own department that in this room until I had flagged that there seems to be a change in direction. Didn't really realise that was the case. So he's indicated today that there is a change in direction from the previous Minister, which I must admit, given the current situation, is disappointing, and I think we need to probe into that further. Also,
I think we need to question the rationale around the
yes, the reasoning behind it, and I appreciate, and recognise anyone's right to buy their own home, but there's issues within that in the present context, and we must recognise that as well. People are buying houses and they've been rented out all over the place, and rents are going up. Aside from that, the important statement from the Minister in relation to that he's currently considering the process to which it would enable the Housing Executive to borrow money to build is a significant statement from this Minister, and a hugely welcome one as well. And I think it would be a game changer. And I think that the Treasury conversations is important, and that we should be updated as that progress continues.
Members content with that?
I'll just say actually what we do need to have on the back of that is what's happened with the revitalisation of the Housing Executive, because there's no point throwing money at the Housing Executive in its current format when they can sell off the properties.
Yes.
Are they going to sell off the new ones?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That needs, both things in tandem need to be raised. I have concerns about the right to buy scheme in one aspect, and its current format, and I agreed with the previous minister actually in the direction that she was taking. But in relation to the borrowing powers of the housing executive, I do believe, the other issue aside for now, I think it is transformational for the housing executive in itself, because it will enable that body with a huge amount of assets to create quite a significant number of new housing units, not for sale.
No, but just to be very clear, the housing executive in its current format cannot.
Cannot, no.
Yeah. No, I know that, yes. But I'm saying that he's considering that.
Then he's talking about changing the format of the housing executive. That's revitalisation piece. We need to drill down into what he means by that.
Yes. Yeah. Everything he said, there's a couple of things that are positive there, there's some that are disappointing, but we need to delve into those two areas because they are critical to all of the presentations that this committee has received over the last few weeks in relation to housing.
And just highlighting the disparity then that currently exists between housing associations, which we're able to stop being able to purchase, and we're still left with housing executive properties where they can purchase, so it needs to be rectified.
I was quite disappointed actually when I got the Minister's answer about the legislative programme. If we could write to ask for clarification on that. We are members of the Legislative Assembly, and I think we need to have clarity. One, I know and sat through the gambling legislation, how many clauses it had, and all of the other legislation that we went through the last time. I think it would be only fair to say that we've got a couple of ideas there. Defective premises, the hybrid councils apparently is coming through in the next weeks. We haven't seen anything yet, so we haven't had our consultation piece on that. Benefits and welfare legislation, well, we go through SRs and SLs all the time, but it's what's actually coming down the road for us.
Yes, thank you. I have a couple more, Melissa, before I come to you. So if Sean, then Brian.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the piece about casement. And it's not my belief that a minister has to wait until funding is completely in place to put out that procurement process. I think that he talks about reputational damage. If we lose Euro 28, I think that's reputational damage on a whole other level here. And I think, as far as I am aware, a minister can put out a procurement process subject to funding. So I would propose that the committee write to the minister, ask why he's not considering putting that out subject to funding, given that we have such tight timescales here. And it'll fall on the minister if we end up losing this tournament, which is, I mean, as you said, Chair, we're looking at over 100 million for Northern Ireland alone, let alone for that cost of work for the funding and investment across the UK.
So are members content with that?
Just supplemented slightly, Chair. Like, at an earlier indication before the restoration of these institutions, the Secretary of State was to the fore of the news saying how the British government would not allow this project to falter. And then as soon as these institutions returned, we were told something entirely the opposite of that. So really, and the Irish government have coughed up a significant amount of money, which I don't believe has been recognised properly by the Minister, and it needs to be. There needs to be conversations with the Secretary of State about the British government's stake in this project, because it is vital for this place, and there's huge damage that could be done to the reputation of this place if this is not delivered, to be honest.
Thank you.
Can I get clarification then, so that there's a specific letter from committee raising the question of why the tender cannot go ahead subject to funding, to include whether a question on whether or not there are ongoing conversations with the Secretary of State regarding that contribution.
Yeah, members consent. Thank you. Brian.
Yep. Well, regarding casement in the year 2028, I think we would need to know, has a design been finalised? Because I think that's part of the problem. You can't go out to tender if you don't have the details of what companies would be tendering for. So I think that question would need to be asked.
Apparently so, Brian.
And well, I think, again, this is dependent on the funding being available. You can't finalise the design until you know what the total cost is going to be. Is the funding there?
I thought the Minister was indicating that he had the tender documents. I would suggest he has tender documents for a design.
Yeah. Well, I don't know the answer to the problem, but the design and the availability of funding, the two things are linked. I don't know how you can go out to tender for a project. You don't know how much funding you actually have and that will affect the actual design that you'll be putting out to tender.
The design
I
is
think
set.
we need to ask that.
Design's set by the Euros. That's they have standards that they require for any of their matches.
Yes, I'm aware of that, but I'm still not aware that the design for the actual stadium itself, in all its circumstances. I think that question should be asked if we're writing, and I think it's also a question of all the funders.
Well, I have I have no problem including. I think what Sean is saying is that you can go ahead and tender, given time is of the essence. You can go ahead and tender, subject to funding. You don't have to wait for one to start. This is going to have to be a very, very well-managed process, and the Minister has to play his role. So I think that's the key part of yours. I have no issue about asking, but I take it if the Minister has tender documents, then those are to a design. You can't tender without that.
Well, I think we should ask, has the design been finalised for the stadium? I think that is relevant. It's going out to tender. On the NI water problem, I'm not sure was it in our correspondence there, but maybe to highlight the need, whether we can write to the executive as a whole or to the executive office on behalf of the executive, just highlighting the need for this to be a cross-departmental priority. So it's not seen as only belonging to infrastructure. It impacts greatly on the work of communities and indeed other departments. And on the right to buy, my understanding is the Minister is not proposing any change to the current situation. So the current situation where housing executive tenants do have a right to buy, which is largely over their stock, but housing associations do not.
That was the ONS legal ruling that had to happen.
But the Minister, my understanding, is not proposing to change.
Yes, but this is the problem that we have, Brian. We took that right away from housing associations, but we left it with the housing executive. That's unfair. And to sell off old properties, it's still going back into the private rental market. That ONS made it very clear that if you want to have a social or housing associations, and the housing executive or landlord is supposed to be moving towards that, then they have to stop selling their stock.
Yeah.
Yes, but the point is, as the law stands, the Minister's not proposing to change it. So it's not a case of saying he's changing policy.
What I think is there has been an indication. There's been an indication in the previous one that it's something that needs to change, and I think that's what we're saying as a committee. We need to explore what the impact of not changing it will be.
And Chair, to supplement that, when the previous Minister made the statement of the intended change of direction, clearly justified the reasons for that direction of travel, and it was backed up to the hilt by departmental officials at that particular time. The only reason it wasn't delivered is because this place collapsed. Let's be honest about it. And it would have been in place. So this is a change of direction, and it's a change of policy within the department. Without a doubt.
Yeah, but all I'm making the point is that the Minister is not proposing a change to the law as stands. So he's just some people are making it as if he's wanting to change the law.
Well, I think we're clear. I think we're clear on that.
We're clear.
And clear on the need for change.
Yes, and different ministers will have different views.
Just to be clear, that means that there is a systematic change to how this revitalisation of the housing executive is being taken forward. Because in order for the housing executive to be revitalised, the landlord section has to be the same as every other housing association. So the ONS requires that to happen. So that to me is a bigger picture issue. There is something more going on there where we're not actually talking about revitalising the housing executive now.
Okay, listen, we've agreed the letter. I don't want to get bogged down. You've made your point, Brian.
The only question I think does need to be clarified is in terms of modern housing executive stock. We have a small number at Sunningdale in my constituency. I think it's 8 2-bedroom, 6 or 8.
The committee's looking clarification on all, not on any narrow basis.
I think that's a particular case. So, because actually that newer stock, I would challenge that it shouldn't be made available for right to buy.
Well, I think the committee is seeking to find out why all of the stock wouldn't be included within that. Yeah. So I think that's you've made your point, Brian. It's on the record. Sorry, is this on this issue, Andy? Because I've already
Chair, yep. It's just on the revitalisation piece because some of the different commentary around it certainly has me confused. I'm seen to be picking up from the Minister he's looking to see if he can get a technical change around borrowing, which seems to be ditching the wider revitalisation potentially around the creation of a cooperative or mutual type body. So if we can just seek clarification on that, is the Minister still exploring the cooperative mutual type body that the former Minister proposed, and also it was highlighted in the Chamber that it would not be the creation of perhaps a super housing association situation, given the scale of the housing executive stock, and is it more the technical change around the ability of the housing executive to borrow?
Conclude that, yeah. Melissa, briefly if you can.
Just a general comment again too, that whenever the Minister was making his presentation from the outset, I was making notes, and whether we were talking about housing or sports or even the sign language issue and that as well too, I kept writing how. In other words, I was hearing all of the problems being sort of displayed to us, but I wasn't hearing any sort of a strategy that has been adopted to address many of these problems. And in fact then, even in an area of which I had a particular interest in, the Irish language and the likes of it, and the Irish language strategy, we've been told that development plans have been developed. Is that the height of it? Is that where we're at with it? And I'd like to hear something much more specific in relation to that. And you're quite right that whenever you also alluded to the notion that Kelly, whenever they said about the hybrid communication within council and so on, again, it's on the long finger really, and we're not hearing anything else. So I'd like to hear something more specific. Or is it the case that the Minister's only, we'll say, new to the job and there isn't anything more specific there? But I'd like to think that given the background, i.e. in terms of the permanent secretary and that with them, that they should have had greater clarity and we should have had more detail in a whole lot of these areas.
So the proposal, if I'm right and understand, is that we write to the Minister asking for an update on both of those issues, the hybrid council meetings and the Irish language strategy, and to include timelines for
timelines, exactly right.
I think, Chair, as well, just in the interest of full opportunity to scrutinise the Minister. The Minister won't be before this committee as often as we would like. He's a very busy individual, but when he is here, I think we should try and keep him here as long as we possibly can. And really, we could have questioned the Minister today for 2 hours, because if you're going down a line of questioning and you're on the hook, it's very difficult to get at if you're time restricted. Because I'm not saying the Minister did this today, I don't believe he did, but he could very easy filibuster and use up a member's time, which prevents. So, and that's what Militia is really pointing to in relation to how or why or whatever. You need the space, and that's a reflection of it's just some person we could have in relation to these matters.
Chair, just one point that I picked up during the whole presentation was the way he elaborated everything that he wanted to do was dependent on funding, and that would involve all departments coming to an agreement on funding. So, let's not hang him out before we wash him.
Okay, members, well, listen, thank you for that. Clerk, are you content?
We have the next briefings. People already in the room.
Okay.
I know you'd agreed to move a couple of agenda items forward. Would committee be content to take those and move the rest?
Would committee be content that we take the next guests are here? Could we take those guests and do that briefing and then we'll move back to our agenda item? Yeah. Okay, members content, so therefore I'll go ahead and ask for the next briefing to be brought forward, which is agenda item 6, members, briefing by the Construction Employers Federation. So members, you do have a briefing paper there at page 193, and I'd now like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we have this morning Mark Spence, who's Chief Executive, and David Fry, who's Head of Public Affairs. So Mark, could I invite you to go ahead and make a very brief opening statement if you can, as brief as possible, and then we'll get to members' questions, please. Thank you.
Chair, thank you, members. Good morning. Delighted to take this opportunity to brief you on the challenges as we see them regarding home building in Northern Ireland. As you say, I'm Mark Spence, Chief Executive, joined today by my colleague David Fry, Head of Public Affairs. As you may be aware, Construction Employers Federation, CEF, is the sole representative body for construction, which is our second largest industry in Northern Ireland. Represent about 70% of all construction in Northern Ireland, around 800 businesses of all sizes, employing around 30,000 staff directly and 65,000 in the wider supply chain. Firstly, Chair, reflecting on the Minister's recent comments in this room and his statement to the Assembly on Monday, we acknowledge the proposed bill which will introduce new provisions into the Limitation NI Order 1989, establishing a retrospective period of up to 30 years and a prospective period of up to 15 years in which a party can take action for defective premises. With many of our members already working in England and Wales and therefore being familiar with many aspects of the Building Safety Act 2022, It is to be noted that this will now bring us into line with other jurisdictions within the UK, and we look forward to working with the Department's residential building safety team on this and other elements of the expert panel reporting improving safety in high-rise residential buildings in NI going forward. Turning back to the briefing note, which has been provided, Chair, we believe it's important to reflect on current market conditions facing home builders locally, and consequently the direct impact that this is having on consumers. For some 15 years, NI has, on an annual basis, built only around 50 to 60% of new house building need. Taken cumulatively over that period, this has resulted in a dearth of new supply of housing of all types of tenures, and that has further exacerbated our social housing waiting list and the difficulties that many have in being able to move from the increasingly expensive home rental to home ownership situation. While recent years there have been positive steps taken by DFC to introduce new models of home ownership to the market, as well as provide continued and vital support to co-ownership housing, little has shifted the dial in terms of new home starts and completions. To give you some context, in a recent survey of our own house builders, this has made clear to us that the current wastewater capacity constraints are currently holding up 8,450 new house builds. That equates to just under £1 billion of investment in the local economy. As we understand it, when coupled with proposals from housing associations and other developers, that figure may be as high as 19,000 homes, which today we are unable to proceed with. Against a backdrop of a 60-year low in housing completions in 2023 and the ever-growing social housing waiting list, it's unquestionable, therefore, that we are in the middle of a housing crisis in NI. With DFC's revised draft housing supply strategy of February 2022 targeting the delivery of 10,000 new homes each year in the period 22 to 37, we believe it is crucial that the NI Executive treats housing as its main priority for the rest of this mandate, because if it does not, we risk removing from an entire generation the opportunity to have a home they can call their own. We have therefore proposed a number of areas which, taken in totality, we believe can help in meeting our medium to long-term housing need. These include putting in place multi-year budgets for capital, agreeing with Treasury year-end flexibilities for capital budgets, agreeing ring-fenced CapEx funding with the Treasury for specific areas of investment, utilising the full extent of the Executive's RRI borrowing facility per annum, developing fundamental reforms to the funding and governance models of NI Water and the Housing Executive, be that mutualisation or revitalisation, significant reform of our local planning system, expediting the Council's LDP processes, taking further steps to foster partnerships between house builders and housing associations, and delivering uplifts in our building regulations and reform of the cost of electricity connections. Obviously, we're more than happy to take questions on any of these matters or other proposals and other questions that committee members would like to raise, but we thank you again for the opportunity this morning.
Okay, thank you. And certainly in keeping with a lot of the work of the committee, even in this short space of time, has been around the issue of housing and the barriers and the challenges that are presented there. So and while the wastewater issue is massive, to me that's coming as a result of historic underinvestment, and it's something we really need to catch up with very quickly. We've already just discussed within committee the whole issue around the right to buy and the importance of that, the revitalisation of the Executive, and both good housing and good public water are both a human right and a public good, and those should not, in my opinion, be funded simply by looking at water charges or higher rents. We have to acknowledge that people are struggling, and we have to find solutions to these problems. And I know that we're working on many of those, as are the department. So thank you for your briefing. I'm going to go ahead there to members. I'll start with Kelly.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mark and David. I'll declare an interest. I was recently at the President's Dinner, a very enjoyable evening it was too with CEF. I want to look back at your presentation. One of the concerns that I have, that I believe that you share with me, is the utilisation of the full extent of the Executive's RRI borrowing facility per annum. One of the things I just wanted to clarify with yourselves, obviously we do need to have an increase in new builds, but can I just double check with yourselves? We know that we have a vast amount, and especially in the Housing Executive area, of homes that are not up to standard. Can and do you think that borrowing could be used for significant uplifts of those homes to passive house standard, or would that not be allowed to be used for that?
I'm not entirely. I think the way the RRI funding has been used normally is where there's sometimes where there's can be like a funding stream in the background. Undoubtedly, with respect to the housing executive stock, is in massive need of uplift. That is certainly another one of the challenges that we would have for the executive. I know there was a report a few years ago, maybe it was in 2021, which said that to bring Northern Ireland's housing stock up to Band B, a low Band B, it would cost about £9 billion. That's just an extraordinary sum of money, and I look bluntly, in the context of the funding constraints, I don't know where that's coming from. And to an extent, that is a question we're asking of the executive: is how are we going to do that? Never mind moving forward with new build and the building regulation changes there. On RRI borrowing itself, it was quite right for the executive. I think in the year after sort of COVID set in 2020, it was welcome that the executive moved back to using RRI borrowing, seeking to use it to its full extent every year. The challenge was in that first year of the 200 million, only about 50 million was used. So that's a recurring £200 million facility, which is on top of the executive's capital, and the piece, as we mentioned in our briefing note, that is of most concern to us, the capital budget taken in totality is 1.8 billion in this financial year. That's 300 million down on last year, and it's the same in cash terms as 17 years ago.
And how
so when we take into the context then of prioritisation, the NI Water piece, as we understand it, NI Water are looking for about a third of that 1.8 billion, and that would be a recurrent requirement for at least a decade. So the challenge is huge, but utilising the means that you already have at your disposal is pretty critical in that.
And just thinking then of that type of borrowing that could be available, I'm very aware if the housing executive take on borrowing, that falls onto the cash books for the executive, which is not a thing, to be honest, we may be able to afford. Whereas housing associations, it doesn't fall onto the books. It lies with them. But I'm just thinking about your members. So if they have developers look at areas and they know, actually, if we build there, we know that it's going to be take up. How easy is it for you to access through to that borrowing? Does it have to go through a department? Does there have to be a funding stream already set up in order for your members to do that? Just explain to me how that works.
Yeah, that would be so. In terms, sorry. Yes. So in terms of our members, yes. Firstly, critical for them is the pipeline of works. So where they're engaging with the housing associations, getting the housing associations out of that 1 year cycle themselves is critical to our members in terms of coming along on the contracting side. But again, if you don't have that longer term pipeline, it's a big problem, and it's where a lot of our members find it much easier to do work in Britain or in the south, because they do have that longer term pipeline.
The Chair was looking in just on that point.
Just on that issue, and just to declare conflict, family members work in the construction industry. The Minister has updated us on the Residential Decarbonisation Coordination Group, which obviously is to look at the whole revitalisation regarding housing, the roadmap to net zero, to gain industry confidence with the likes of yourselves, and to enable innovation and to activate a mobilisation of finance, construction and energy sectors. Are you part of that? And how is the coordination group working? Are you part of that group?
No, we're not directly part of that. No. We have been involved in various things over the last few years. The Belfast City Council, for instance, doing quite a bit of work in and around what they can do within their council area, but we're not specifically part of that. We would be quite focused in terms of where government has engaged with us over the last couple of years around the new build housing going forward and its standards, as we move towards electrification of heat and such like. But on the retrofit piece, no, not at this stage.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that something that we could write to the Minister on? Because I think it's quite critical that you are actively involved on that coordination group and moving forward.
Members content?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Brian, go ahead.
Thank you for the paper you've provided and for your attendance today. And certainly that's a stark statistic where it's actually for 15 years Northern Ireland has on an annual basis built only around 50 to 60% of its new build housing need, and we're dealing with that crisis that built up over 15 years. You've rightly highlighted the wastewater infrastructure issue, which every time I have engagement with housing associations, private developers, this is the issue which add six-figure sums to developments with separation of stormwater and sewage systems, and quite often one developer has to pay for something which someone else further down the line then benefits from, but the first developer is taking that financial hit, and it just makes some developments unaffordable, that it just doesn't add up for what the properties can yield on sale. So as you will be aware, we're aware of this issue, and we're highlighting it with the Minister and at executive level, that it's not just an issue for one department, it's cross-cutting and it impacts on your sector. Two questions I want to ask specifically. Again, in my dealings with developers and housing associations, when I'm trying to get derelict sites developed, there's been a growth now in the design and build approach, where the developer through a construction company can build houses which would be social houses, and then the housing association has agreed in advance to take those on with departmental approval. Just be interested in your comments. Do you hear back from member groups? Is that route working for them? Is it enabling development, particularly on privately owned land, where previously the sites might have to have been purchased in the first place, but through that route at least it enables land to be developed? And secondly, have you a view? I'm always interested in exploring the idea of higher rise development, which is common when you visit other cities, and we have a tradition, people preferring their own front door, garden space and so on, although increasingly I find people don't want to maintain gardens, but they like to have the space anyway. And the Housing Executive took the decision a while ago about demolishing the high-rise blocks across Northern Ireland. I know there's some pushback on that now, and I don't know where that's at, but have you a view from your members on higher rise in terms of, especially in cities and brown site development? We see the growth of student accommodation, which is higher rise and seems to be working, providing for that need. Have you a view on higher rise development? Is there a certain size that seems to work, and what is the demand for that?
So your first question around developers developing out a site which is then purchased.
Have a very brief there, and then maybe some of these issues you need to come back and writing on, because it's quite a long question.
That seems to be an option within the market which works very well for those with sites to develop out, and works very well for housing associations, gives them flexibility and possibly shorter timescales than public procurements may deliver. So I think that is a valuable opportunity. In terms of high rise, we would certainly see that as being part of the solution when you look at the ambitious targets, particularly Belfast City Council would have for new homes within the city centre. It doesn't seem to us viable that those could be delivered entirely by low level. You're right, our skyline is, by relative standards to other cities, quite low. There hasn't been a history of high rise. There is no particular experience locally, I suppose, of procuring that. We could certainly deliver it. We have members delivering it in other parts of these islands, but it will be very much down to planning, and we come back to it again, wastewater. So the density on particular sites, at the moment you can replace a single dwelling with a single dwelling, probably with the support of NI Water. If you're trying to build upwards, the capacity constraints will probably kill that at the moment.
So, Chair, if I just clarify, so just when the Housing Executive seemed to take a policy, a shift away from high rise, so your members aren't saying it's not a viable option for the future?
No, our members would be content to build in whatever fashion is required of them.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Lisa?
5 year old from Mark, August, David. Mark and David, you're very welcome. See this part of us, everything else being equal. Let's say if your asks were met, as the Construction Employers Federation, are you in a position, we'll say, in terms of the skilled workforce to deliver the programmes that you would hope to deliver at the present time? And if not, what involvement do you have, we'll say, with the likes of our FE institutions and so on, that very often is the training ground for many of the skilled workers that you would require in order to meet a building programme?
Very good question, and a very current topic for all sectors, but particularly for our sector. First to say is we have a lot of skilled, talented people not working in this part of the island because they've gone elsewhere for job opportunities, and this is because of the patchy pipeline and the start-stop nature of construction. If we could address that pipeline and provide more robust assurance, we could create those sustainable jobs locally and retain that talent. Some members will be aware and would have been in the Long Gallery last year when we launched Construction Futures Limited, a company that's been set up by the CEF in conjunction with Unite and GMB trade unions. We've made senior appointment to that company, and we met the Minister yesterday for Economy, Finance and Infrastructure, explaining what we are doing around the skills agenda. And very much it's about much enhanced engagement with FE colleges, but also starting in primary schools, secondary schools, further education, and more engagement around CITB and other training providers, so that we can actually present construction as a very attractive, sustainable career choice. I think we're not perceived as that at the moment. We've done ourselves an injustice for many, many years. We're trying to address that now and be proactive about creating a prospectus essentially for careers in construction, which doesn't exist. And we need to map out for young people that this is actually an attractive career. That needs to be underpinned by a very robust investment programme from the executive, of course, to make those jobs sustainable.
Thank you, Marisa. Morris.
Thank you, Chair. Just I'll be very brief. It's about the local development plans from the 11 council areas. They're very far behind schedule, and what impact that's going to have on the likes of yourselves, and also the problem of land banking. And because the LDPs are so far behind, there's no longer a call for sites. So land banking, especially in my area, coastal area, where everybody wants to live on the north coast apparently, land banking is a big issue. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, so as you say, a lot of focus on the councils is on the various stages of the LDP process. Truly speaking, the one where our members are A, most involved, and also B, most interested is the call for sites. And we're only really at that point in 2. And that means that in terms of the supply of land, and when you have a lot of towns, rural, sort of a lot of the old sort of market towns, if you will, where a lot of their plans might be 20, 25 years old. So I think of, for instance, and Kelly will be familiar with, some of the sites in Newton Ards, where recently, you've started to rezone bits of land because it was zoned for retail, and now really it's not going to happen, so you start to rezone it and bring it forward for housing instead, because it's much better use of the land, and it's a proactive way for Ards and North Down Borough Council in that example to go, well listen, what can we do in order to revitalise this particular area of, in that case, Newton Ards. The call for sites, though, I suppose one of the challenges there is you can have the call for sites, you can rezone a lot of existing land for housing, you can zone more land for housing. Where we're getting to with a lot of our members is the challenge of, okay, should I then go and purchase that land or be interested in that land, because when am I likely to get a wastewater connection? That's where we're kind of bottlenecking now with a lot of our members. Many of our what we would call traditional sort of private house builders would tell us they effectively have about 18 months left of housing they're building out. They own land, but there is effectively no point going into the planning system with that land because they can't get anywhere. So if you had, separately to that, the councils moving forward at speed and having their call for sites completed, finished, the challenge would then be, well, does that necessarily then automatically mean there's a massive surge of applications? Well, no. And I think one of the issues that we probably would have is that the figure that Northern Ireland Water have used about the 19,000 houses that are currently being held up, we don't necessarily see that figure drastically increasing, because that figure is based on people going in for pre-development inquiries and parts of planning applications. If you don't think if you know there's no capacity in your local area, you're not going to start that process anymore. So that 19,000 figure, to some extent, mightn't actually shoot up as much as you think it might, but it means that most, and we know from talking to planning consultancies across the country, they're seeing a massive drop-off in the number of people coming to them with inquiries for new housing applications, because everybody knows you can't get a wastewater connection.
I think the word crisis has been used, Chair, about wastewater management. I would go further and say it's actually an emergency and needs to be dealt with urgently. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Morris. Okay, Ciara?
Just 2 questions. One is on the wastewater connections and stuff. Could you, or maybe inform us afterwards if you don't know now, but where is kind of the key? Are you saying across the north, or is there particular pinch points regarding current housing developments? And I'm thinking of the likes of Derry in the northwest, particularly where I'm from. And then just secondly, one of your key asks with regards to fostering partnerships between housing associations and house builders. How do you, if you've any suggestions, how you think that can happen. Thank you.
I mean, just on the first point with regard to the wastewater piece, it's pretty much everywhere. There are some, in effect, gaps still, depending on the volume of housing you say you're bringing forward for an application, depending on maybe whether you can do things like stormwater offsets, whether there actually is a developer-funded solution. But when you're talking where a lot of our members are in the big number housing developments, 200, 300, 400 unit sites, in effect right now there's hardly any of those which would move forward. On the flip side of that is, if you were then on those kind of sites to say to a developer, well, could you completely fund the NI water shortfall? Well, in many cases that would outweigh the actual level of investment you're putting into the development, so it would be completely unviable. So we're kind of stuck in that regard.
What level is viable with regards to? Is it 800 houses? What roughly for the developer to actually make that contribution to the project? Is there?
It was mentioned earlier around six-figure sums. I think if you're looking at any sort of wastewater infrastructure on a particular site for any number of houses, you're at seven figures before you start. Yeah. So you're then trying to spread that cost over a number of units. So yes, it would be a very high number of units to make it viable.
So just as an example, when we think about Northern Ireland and a lot of the housing being market town type housing that a lot of our members are engaged in, if I go back to about 2018, 2019, there was a wastewater treatment works upgrade proposed in Limavady. At the time, that was probably thought to be around £3 to £4 million. That cost now is maybe treble.
Really?
So that's because of construction inflation and various things. So that's the kind of figures you're talking about to unlock towns.
So just to be clear, so the plan could be for 400 houses.
Yeah.
And you're talking about trebling the cost of the wastewater treatment works. Yes. Ultimately, the only way that a builder or a developer can actually go forward with that is to add that onto the price of the houses that they're selling.
Yeah.
So this is where it's the whole stall is happening.
Yes.
Plus, I was speaking to a lot of organisations, and the planning permission takes much longer, 2, 3, 4 years. So
There is
it reduces capacity on the site. Plus, there's a question mark about the management of them longer term.
And there is an element, and when we talk about joined up, there is an element with this, with if Northern Ireland Water had more certainty over the longer term, when you get a planning permission, it's valid for 5 years. Can we somehow join up? You can't be completely certain about this because Northern Ireland Water will always say, well, it's dependent on funding. But if there is a relative certainty that a wastewater treatment works might be done in 3, 4 years' time, somebody might be more inclined to go into planning because they know it might take 2 years to get through planning anyway, and it might, on the back end of that, be that the planning permission would still be valid by the time the wastewater upgrade was completed. But effectively where we are right now is that there's no capacity, it's just a no.
Okay. You listen very briefly on the partnership idea and have to move on then.
There's a partnership. There are a number of ideas, certainly in terms of public procurement in the past. Our members would tell us that the lack of available sites means that those coming forward now are increasingly brownfield sites. There could be ground condition issues that tend to be on steep sites, or maybe contamination issues. Our members would tell us it would be immensely helpful if the housing associations would provide and stand over a ground condition report against which they could all price the risks. Currently what happens is the bidders are all at risk to conduct their own reports at their own costs, and it seems slightly inefficient. But there's a number of very practical measures, and we work very closely with our colleagues in NIFA. We sit on the Better Housing Forum, and there's issues like that we're very content to work through. But I think the lack of sites, as we've laid out, and the increased costs means that we need to be very efficient in terms of how we procure and build those and work with housing associations. But the housing associations are key clients for the construction industry, and we're very keen to work with them.
Thank you. Daniel?
Thank you, Chair. Mark and David, you're very welcome, and thank you for taking our questions and being so honest about the very serious challenges that we have. Within the presentation, you suggest that we need 10,000 new homes per year. So you've touched on some of these aspects, but what infrastructures need to be put in place to achieve that particular goal? How long would it take to do that? And what would the estimated or expected cost be, which is difficult to predict in recent times because of the fluctuation, etc. And arising from this, how realistic is a 10,000 home target per year, given the context that we're in?
So, as you were discussing with the Minister beforehand, as an organisation we would also be very supportive of a housing outcome in the programme for government. 10,000 is a stretching target. That was in the revised document the DFC, I think, shared just before the executive collapsed in the spring of 2022. I know the Minister's looking at that right now, so that might be revised up, might be revised down. But look, last year saw the lowest level of completion since 1959, which completely staggered me, because I thought where we were in 2008, 2009 was an awful lot lower. Actually, no, where we were last year was even lower than the worst bit of the recession 15 years ago. So, to answer your question, is it deliverable in the short to medium term to get to 10,000 units a year of housing of all types? I in the context of the wastewater piece, no, it is not. It's just not possible, unless you were to completely allow development and allow, connections not to effectively be scrutinised, etc., and there was no oversight from NI Water. It's the only way you could do it. That's something we would certainly not be advocating. So I'm not sure how quickly you could get to that. The piece around Northern Ireland Water, we know that what is in price PC21 was initially 6 years. It's now probably a more 10-year programme. Their prices that a lot of the time we talk about the 2.1 billion over 6 years, that was in 2018 prices. Those prices do not exist anymore, frankly. So the length of the programme we're talking about here, in our view, requires a little bit more of, if we're entirely reliant on the block grant and we then need to divvy that up among all the other departments, this is going to take an awful long time. And the impact on housing, but also on all other departments. And we know, I think from yesterday, of the 1.8 billion that's in the Executive's capital budget this year, the DOF are dealing with over 3 billion worth of bids. So that's the challenge for us, and that's why we see housing as the biggest problem, but of a very long list.
Yeah. Just a very quick stat, just for context. In the south, there are about 40,000 house completions per annum, and that's still considered a crisis. Even prorating for population, we're at less than 50%.
Yeah, the Chair, no doubt, and I appreciate the honesty from our two witnesses, because we are definitely in a crisis that is worsening by the day, and certainly it's something we do need to overcome. And in fairness to NI Water, they've been very forthright with me for quite a long period of time as well about the challenges they've faced. Sarah Venning has been very cooperative and very open, in my opinion, and when it comes to any engagement with NI Water on behalf of contractors in my own constituency, they've been engaging but very honest about the challenges, and really the problem does rest here, and we need to do more to resolve this. It's not a popular thing, Chair, and I think we need to recognise that. No minister wants to spend money on things that cannot be seen, but it's going to be there's going to be a need for a cross departmental approach to this, and support of the Executive to ensure that this problem is resolved. Otherwise, the consequences are going to be drastic.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mark and Daniel, for coming, or Mark and David, sorry, for coming along to today's meeting. I appreciate your having some. It is a worrying picture, no question about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, would you be content if we follow the same pattern? Go ahead and take our next briefing. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. So moving on then to Agenda 7, briefing by co-ownership. If I could ask the guests to come forward. So remember, the briefing for this is at page 199 on your pack there, and I now welcome to our meeting the following representatives. We have Mark Graham, Chief Executive, and Charles O'Neill, who is Director of Product Development. So could I ask for a really brief opening statement? Mark, please.
Yep, certainly. Thank you for the opportunity to update you on the work of co-ownership. I suppose just to start by explaining who we help. So you had housing organisation last week talking about people who are homeless and the outrageous levels of number of people living in housing stress. We help a particular cohort of people that are on moderate incomes, whose housing options are extremely limited. Their only real housing option at the moment is the private rented sector. They want to own their own home, and you'll see from the briefing, it's about affordability, it's about security, it's about agency in their lives. And there's been a huge generational shift. My generation would have found home ownership relatively straightforward. House prices were lower, saving a deposit was much easier. We have a generation of people now that, without the help of their families, without the help of people gifting them deposits, are really struggling to get home ownership. And part of it was what CF were talking about. We're simply not building enough homes to create that affordability. So co-ownership's been around for 45 years. We are the regional body in terms of delivering shared ownership in Northern Ireland. We are a housing association registered and regulated by the Department of Communities, but what we do is shared ownership, and that's what we've been focused on over that period. I'm sure most members, broadly know how the model works, and essentially it's part own, part rent. But it's also worth saying, that it's designed in a way that's always cheaper than mortgaging, and particularly in recent years, it is considerably cheaper than renting, and we've seen the huge increase in the cost of renting over the last couple of years. The other thing we want our customers able to do is to buy the whole property. So over 90% of our customers will actually transition through co-ownership and actually own their own property. I've provided some figures in terms of what the numbers we've done this year and in terms of the numbers we've done the last few years. Obviously the most notable bit is the drop off in the last couple of years numbers, and that has been driven by house prices increasing during the COVID period. It's been impacted by our customers finding it difficult to find homes that are affordable. And then we had the cost of living crisis, huge increases in inflation, energy costs, and the very steep rise in mortgage rates, which have dragged a lot of confidence out of the market. People are still talking to us about it, but they're not sure, is now the right time? Can I afford it? Should I wait for a while? So that's actually caused quite a drop. We've seen a 15% increase in applications last year. That largely happened in the last quarter, and that should feed itself into completions this year. So I think people are coming to terms with interest rates remaining roughly the level that they are. And what they keep saying to us is they don't have any other option anyway. The only option is the private rented sector, which is becoming even more expensive. The sort of properties we buy, I think the key point is customers can go and choose a property anywhere in Northern Ireland under £195,000. We largely buy semi-detached and terraced houses. That's largely what our customers can afford. We have also seen 21% of our purchases last year were new build properties. That's significantly lower than it would have been in the past. And that's because not enough new build properties being built. The ones that are being built are more expensive, and that's been driven by inflation and construction costs. And also because our customers often can't afford new build properties. They can actually better afford resale properties. And we have seen a shift. The inflation in new build properties has been much greater than the inflation in the market generally. That reflects our figures, but it also reflects government statistics. We do a social impact survey, and I provide some information on it, but as I'm sure has been well rehearsed by many other people, when you talk to our customers and you listen to their stories, having a home is just a foundation for the rest of your life. It's about your health and well-being, it's about the life chances of your children, and it is a critical part of infrastructure in terms of the physical infrastructure in Northern Ireland, and also the social infrastructure. And without decent, affordable, secure homes, there's lots of other things we want to achieve in Northern Ireland that won't be achieved. We'll provide some information about the funding. I think the critical part of it is we use government loans for national transactions capital, and we have done since 2015. It's been hugely successful for us because we can actually get longer term multi-year loans, and that means it helps us plan over a longer period, and helps us deal with the natural ups and downs of any the housing market over that period. The other thing to say about it is that money gets recycled, so we repay loans, and the surplus that we make on sale of properties either repays the loan or gets fed back into actually building and buying more homes. So it works very well, and it brings additional money into housing. So we're not competing with capital funding across lots of different aspects of government. That this brings additional funding into housing. So with that, I was going to pass over to Charlie to ask just a few updates on the different products we do.
Very briefly, Charlie, because you didn't leave you much time.
Yes. Just want to briefly mention just our new product, Co-Own for Over 55s, which is recognising that we have an ageing population, and to provide a product that would be available on the affordable housing sphere for those who maybe want to live closer to friends and family, and they're in homes that aren't suitable for them, but they don't have enough money to bridge that gap between property that's more suitable for them. We also have a product called Rent to Own, which enables those who are not quite mortgage ready yet, but are expected to be within the next 3 years, and they would rent a property from ourselves for up to 3 years, and then when they buy that home they would get a 20% rebate on the rent that they have paid. That enables them to buy either through co-ownership or through a straightforward mortgage themselves. And finally, the briefing note covers just a little update on the local development plans and the role that we see that ownership can play as an integral role in relation to the provision of intermediate housing for sale in relation to as those development plans are developed and start the outworkings of them in practice.
Okay. Thank you, thank you both, gentlemen. So I'll go now to members then. So I'll go first of all to our Deputy Chair, Ciara. Go ahead, Ciara.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Charles. I'm delighted you could be here, and I think it's fantastic the work that you do, and particularly in relation to the financial transaction capital and that model. It's really, really good to get in the true value for money, and it's getting reinvigorated into continue to develop it and support people into accommodation. And I'm conscious, obviously, like 7% are utilising particularly first-time buyers, and over the last few years that's a huge issue that comes through our door. First-time buyers cannot get on the ladder, and usually your only option. Generally, what I want to ask, and I've discussed this with you before, Mark, is just in relation to the uptake, because I'm conscious of it's crucial that across the board people uptake the model. So just in relation to, is there any difference between rural and urban communities regarding the uptake of it? And I know you've listed a lot of issues in relation to the slow uptake, and now that's turned around. But is there any difference between urban and rural, and whether there are areas still whereby it has been more or less effective to date, and maybe some analysis from just yourselves, from your own knowledge over the years? Is there key areas?
Yeah, our transactions are correlated with the general transactions, housing transactions in that area. Yeah. So it is generally around the Belfast and those corridors out M1 and M2. We do buy properties right across Northern Ireland. We do buy properties in rural areas. We do buy houses in the countryside, but generally speaking, it is correlated with what's happening in the housing market. Yeah. As we've discussed before, there are certain areas that we when you look at the transaction levels, we feel you should be doing more. So we've been doing two things. We have an advertising campaign that's been ongoing through TV, billboards, and on digital, and that's been going on for a couple of years now. And we have a business development team that actually goes out and about and will set up stands in supermarkets, will set up stands in shopping centres, or use local lenders, talk to local estate agents. So we are very conscious of getting out and about, and it is one of our fundamental beliefs that this needs to be available, understood, and we would like to see the uptake right across Northern Ireland. So and we've had this discussion, I think, with other people in the community before. We're very welcome to come out to constituency offices or events that you're running to tell people about the product. It is something we keep working on because my gut instinct about it is that there's a lot of people out there that could use co-ownership that are currently are not using it. We want to help as many people as possible.
No, thank you. And be useful to maybe follow up with yourselves to have some conversations how we can innovatively ensure that first-time buyers see the benefits of it, understand it, because I know in my day, 30 years ago, it was nearly kind of seen as a negative. Oh, don't go down that line. And then that's our generation that's influencing the next generation. So it's how we change that. So I very much welcome further conversations.
Part of what we do is to try to tell customer stories and tell the difference it makes to them.
It's word of mouth. It's word of mouth.
I think a lot of that is it's about who you know that's done it, and I think that's part of it too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mark and Charles. I've spoken to yourselves a few times now. There's a couple of questions just I want to follow on with your presentation. You talked there about when people come to yourselves with co-ownership, they will start with yourselves and then move into paying the full mortgage. Around how many years is it that someone, on average, will then take that move?
It varies greatly. So I think we have a group of people that tend to come in with a plan of doing it quite quickly. So in recent years, about 50% of people would actually buy out within 5 years. Now, you'll see the numbers have dropped this year, and that's primarily because right now it's going to cost you more to buy out because mortgage rates have gone up. Some people, will take longer than that, but and it does depend on the housing market and how easy it is to do at the time. Our objective is people to buy out, but even for those that don't, it is a secure home they can stay in for as long as they want. They will pay off their mortgage at some stage. So I think it's that for us that's still a better option. But we hope and we provide that ability for people to buy out as soon as they want to.
As you say, the cost of houses has gone up. One of the things that I'm interested in is ownership could be an option for people, as you say, they're not ready just yet for a mortgage, or they're like me, they're in that age bracket where they're older and they're maybe not working as much. But I'm just thinking, there's one development in Newtonards, and I know that there is a co-ownership house, or a tenant within that. The house itself was built and it has additions that were put onto it as a new build with solar panels and EV chargers, which pushed the cost of the house up, which meant then that the mortgage repayment rate per month would be slightly higher than you would expect. However, the running costs of that house are very, very low. I'm just wondering, have you found any difficulties with that mortgage element, the borrowings and the grant, because the house is more expensive, but the affordability of actually paying back a higher mortgage is easier because the cost of the house is so much less? Have you had any experience of that?
Yeah, I don't think we have directly. I mean, we are conscious that in the future we're going to see more and more homes with solar panels, and more homes that are more energy efficient. But we're not seeing that reflected, for example, in valuations of homes.
Okay.
And it's not something, as far as I know, that lenders would take account of in terms of the running costs of a house.
Generally, but in the future it will be something I think that will have to be factored into those, because you're right, the cost of running a more energy efficient home will be cheaper.
I know one example of a house where the lady who's purchased it is a teacher, new teacher, and could not have afforded a mortgage by herself, and her operating cost of the house is £5 a week for heat and light, because of the energy efficiencies, but because the VAT doesn't apply to a new house. You add all your bits on at the start, but it pushes the mortgage up. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. So, Kelly, I'm going to have to move on. Sorry, time just doesn't allow. I'm going now to Daniel.
Yes, thanks very much for your presentations and for being here. I'm sure you've heard from the previous witnesses in relation to the challenges that exist. Would you share their concerns in relation to how the infrastructure challenges hinder the progression of house builds here, and ultimately how it would affect co-ownership in the long term, I suppose?
Yeah, we've been hearing for the last few years that our customers are finding it difficult to find new built homes, and we've certainly seen a significant reduction in it. And when you talk to house builders, it's a combination of their construction costs have gone up very quickly, a lack of confidence in the market about buying homes. But yes, the thing that keeps coming up again is infrastructure. And in addition to the water infrastructure, we're also increasingly hearing things about the electricity infrastructure. So we clearly need to build considerably more homes than we're building at the moment. We clearly need to build considerably more social homes at the moment. But as many people have said, this is a bigger issue. We also need to spend the money on the infrastructure to allow that to happen.
This is a considerable issue in urban areas, but it would be an acute issue for more rural constituencies such as my own, and thereby there would be a consequence for the uptake in co-ownership because there wouldn't be the available units there. What sort of levels of co-ownership exists in more rural communities compared to that of more urban?
Yeah, I mean, we could probably provide a breakdown of figures that we have across constituencies and council areas to give you a better idea of that. But I think, as I said previously, tends to be the larger housing areas that we do, but it is proportioned to what's happening in that area generally. But if it's useful, we can provide more breakdown in those figures.
Okay, and just a very brief question. And we're an ageing population. Have you a gauge of the demand in over 55-year-olds for suitable housing?
We have funding for 118 homes over 4 years, and what we're hoping in relation to the product itself, in addition to providing that support for people who want to move to more suitable accommodation, but also for the construction industry and to encourage developers that there's a need for retirement type accommodation within the province, and that to encourage them by showing them that there is a market for that need within the affordable housing area, as well as any other areas that may be as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark and Charles. I'm a big fan of co-ownership, and thank you what you've done. And as we discussed before, like in the Lombrook area, in Shankill, a significant percentage, I forget the figure offhand, but I think around a third of the properties were sold with co-ownership. And it's an option which is working for people. I have two questions. One is in terms of your financial model. Ultimately, are you dependent on government funding? I know you're not for profit housing association, and you have a financial model, but are your numbers that you can facilitate limited by statutory funding? That's the first question. And secondly, I'll ask it as well. Do you think the attractiveness of your model will be affected by mortgage rates? Mortgage rates starting to go down, might that reduce the number of people choosing the ownership option, whilst it's still an attractive option? Obviously, it's more attractive when interest rates are high.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the answer to the second question is that it's about confidence in the market. So it is probably true now interest rates have gone up. There were some people we could have helped in the past we can't help, but there's probably some people who now need our help that would have, would be able to in the past would have helped themselves. So it does tend to vary, but my observation historically, our numbers tend to be a reflection of the ups and downs of the housing market rather than something that we act counter to that. And to the first question is simply, yes, it is. If we buy properties bought, about 50% of that funding comes from mortgages that people get. 30% of it comes from government funding, and 20% will comes from our surplus. So without government funding, it would be a very small fraction of what we currently deliver. We have, as I've said in the paper, we've funding that will take us through to March 2025. We have started conversations with the Department of Communities for a further multi-year funding agreement based around FTC, and they're obviously keen that we get working on that quickly so that we can get that resolved as soon as possible.
Right. Okay, but there is you need that statutory funding to keep the model working. You can't get into a self-sustaining model currently.
No, I mean, financially it's not viable for us to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mark and Charles, thank you very much for providing the committee with that update. All these are all crucial elements of a broader housing difficulty and potentially solutions, which is really, I suppose, that we're keen to get into. So thank you for giving your evidence here today.
Thank you very much.
So members, I'm going to move back to a few of our items then, and before we go into closed session, I'll take a quick comfort break, but I want to just work through the agenda items that we have in front of us to clear up. So in terms of draft minutes, agenda item 3 there, I'll take that shortly, Brian. So members, I refer you to draft minutes from the meeting on the 11th of April, which are page 6 of the meeting pack. Are members content to agree the minutes of the 11th of April as drafted?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Matters arising, members. We have several departmental replies, members, to committee, and I am conscious that department officials have provided a number of substantive responses to committee queries. In particular today, we have a lot of detail in relation to staffing and the use of TPs, as well as detailed replies from the Deputy Secretary of Operation Delivery and from the Deputy Secretary of the Work and Health Group. My own view is that I think committee needs a bit more time to give these responses consideration and discussion. So I was wanting to ask members if you'd be content we bring those items back to next week's agenda to get a better look into them. So for the purpose of clarification then, what I'm suggesting is that we bring back the item at page 27 with a departmental reply to committee queries on vacancies and temporary promotions. We bring back the item at page 35, which is a departmental reply to committee queries following the briefing by Deputy Secretary of the Operational Delivery Group. And the item at page 114, which was a departmental reply to committee queries following the briefing by the Deputy Secretary of the Work and Health Group. Are we agreed?
Chair, can I just say, look, we know this. We know that there's a load of reduction. What I'm more interested in is what the impact is on the work that's being delivered. Because my fear is the move to universal credit, if it goes beyond the 5-week wait to 6, 7, 8-week wait, that's when we see crisis in Northern Ireland. I'm aware that the recruitment's going on at the moment. The pay is probably one of the issues why people aren't being recruited. We can talk all day about how many places that are filled, but it's the impact that it's actually having on people in Northern Ireland. Is there something we could do between now and next week when we're going to look at this to ask the department how many people have breached the 5-week wait? How many applications have gone beyond 5 weeks? Just on that as one example. There's going to be other things as applications for child benefit, well, whatever else it is. It's just, I want to see the impact of this.
And that's why I think it's important that we get a proper discussion on that, rather than simply running through as matters arising. So you content with that request, Claire?
Yes, I'm content to have the note to write the letter. There's unlikely to be a response for next week. Do you want the letter written this week, or do you want...
Are we having people coming to speak about this?
No, this is for us to discuss the responses we've received. They're detailed responses, and I want us to have time to discuss those.
I think we're getting into matters that are very particular within a department about staffing levels. It's the impact of the lack of staffing levels. All of these posts are being filled by people at the minute, coming from agencies. You know.
Okay, well, our members broadly content with bring those items back?
I understand that, Kelly, but there's still an issue with this department in relation to it, and by consequence, because this has been allowed to linger on for periods that are excessive, in my opinion, the consequences is that strategies, etc., are not being delivered in a timely enough fashion, and that's why we have this backlog of things that aren't coming forward. We're not seeing any actual progression, and there's actually feedback that I've received, Chair, from people within the department themselves that are very unhappy, to be honest. So that's the reason I continue to raise this. There is an issue with this particular department.
Is that a role for this committee? To deal with labour
it's a role
relations
for this
issues?
committee that impacts on the delivery from that particular department.
So
the point is, if we have to look at the root cause. If the root cause is partially staffing, then that is an issue for this committee, absolutely.
Okay, are members content we bring those items back? Your points noted, Kelly, but members generally content?
Yep.
Thank you. So I run through other items then in matters arising. So you've been provided page 17 with a reply to committee queries on the anti-poverty strategy. That reply states that the Minister has currently been briefed by officials on work completed to date and is considering the next steps to be taken in relation to the strategies. The timescales around public consultation and final publication will be subject to executive approval. Do members have any comments they wish to make or note?
I'm a little bit concerned if this has taken so long, is it going to have any influence on the programme for government?
Yeah.
Or is it going to have any bearing on the budget?
So, and arising from that, any suggested actions? I agree with you. I have to say, I agree with you that we need to see really that strategy coming forward and being resourced. So that those are comments in relation to that.
Is committee seeking to get an assurance that there will be a strategy brought forward, or that it will feature in the programme for government, or are we expressing a concern?
My concern is that the budget will come forward before the summer, and this anti-poverty strategy is not going to hit anywhere close to before the summer. It's going to be into the autumn and winter. I just don't. I think.
Express committee concern that this is not included, not done timely enough to include.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to touch on that, Chair, I know we've only been back here a matter of weeks, but there doesn't seem to be any sense of urgency around this whatsoever. There was a recognition in the House by all parties in recent days in relation to the challenges that exist, but yet the department, not the Minister, the department is trailing their feet in relation to that. It's been a long time coming.
And the department were set the direction to continue. Officials were able or should have been able to continue with the work. So I do think we want to expressly convey our concerns on that.
Would it be possible at this stage, even, I don't know whether under confidence or something like that there, that this committee could have access to all of the draft strategies? Because there's quite a lot are in draft but haven't been published.
A request from the committee?
Yeah.
What, confidential briefing?
To see the current draft?
Yeah.
Confidential briefing?
Of any of the social strategies? Yeah.
But see, in relation to the anti-poverty, is there potential? We know there's draft actions has went to all the government departments for consideration. Can we even have a look at them? So at least we know what is currently being considered to be finalised within an action plan, the anti-poverty strategy. If they've gone to each of the departments anyway, civil services, why can we not see them in draft form?
Yeah. Members content with that approach? Yeah. Thank you. Members, you've been provided page 19 with a reply to committee queries on liquor licensing, breakdown of local producers' licences. The Department has confirmed that as of 27th February, the number of producers' licences have been granted was 16. So members, any comments or the content to note that?
Right low.
Page 21, there's a reply to our request for copies of the minutes of the cross-departmental working group on the Irish language strategy development. The reply states the department considers it more appropriate to share an update on progress with the committee rather than provide the minutes of the cross-departmental working group minutes, as this information relates to development of executive strategies which have not reached public consultation. A summary of work from December 21 to March 24 has also been attached. Do members have any comments or any issues you want to note on that? Content to note for now, members? Yes, thank you. Okay, so
should be available.
we have then items of page, we've agreed to move those, so I'm going to move then to page 95 with the departmental reply to queries on gambling harm education policy. The Minister is considering gambling reform in the context of wider departmental priorities. Regulation of online gambling will naturally form part of these considerations. The Minister hopes to make a decision on a way forward in this in the near future. So I know we have asked the Minister, but that he is committed to providing some further information. So for now, are members content to note, or do you want to comment? Go ahead.
Ofcom are actually currently the online gambling sort of authority for us here. I don't know whether we want to ask Bimpy or some of their team to come and give us an update at some point in the future.
Yeah, we'll
Put it on the list.
Yeah, put it on the list, yeah. Members content to note, yeah.
Yep.
Members, you've been provided page 97 with a departmental reply to queries on progressing sign language. The committee had sought clarification on whether the Minister is liaising with the Minister for Education in relation to plans to bring forward appropriate numbers of teachers. The Minister states that he is not currently liaising with the Minister of Education on that matter. The response further outlines that Ofqual is the body now required to develop the regulatory framework for a sign language qualification, which they will have to consult on, after which it can go back out to the market for an awarding body to develop a qualification specification. Decisions on workforce planning for the development of appropriately qualified and trained GCSE teachers will ultimately, the reply states, be a matter for those departments to progress. Members have any comment, or go ahead.
I have to say I'm extraordinarily disappointed with this. That's not really answering the questions. The point is that the sign language bill, which the Minister has said, to be fair to him, is coming forward. This is a circular problem. If we don't have enough people to deliver the sign language GCSE coming forward, that's a prime example of the sign language bill not being in place to actually deliver the support to people who are deaf to be able to do this type of work. And as a member of the deaf community, I think that the Minister's taken the hand. There should be clarification as to the direction of the sign language bill by now. I'd worked with Carla Lockhart before in the GCSE stuff, and I know exactly where the signature programme is in the development of it. And Northern Ireland, even when it's ready, will not be ready to bring sign language into Northern Ireland. Or the sign language GCSE, and I think we need to see an outline of what the bill proposals are. I think to tell us that it's coming is one thing, but to be honest, as a committee, we need to know exactly what's happening with that. This is part of the disability community that, to be honest, things are being dragged along. It's not happening quickly.
Members content we write back to the department on that basis?
Yeah, when we're writing back, would it be possible to ask for any time the bill is going to be brought forward, that we have an indication of the time frame?
Yeah, we've asked for the legislative. We've asked for the legislative programme, but you're right, that does need to be tightened down into the time frames.
And requesting an outline of the bill proposals.
At this stage, we know it's still in development, but even if we could see what they're working on, because like the best kept secret.
Yeah. Okay. So. Members, during one of the briefings at last week's meeting, we had requested a copy of the survey on the impact of the increase in the minimum wage on supporting people-funded providers. Homeless Connect has forwarded a copy of the report, which is at page 99 there. Do members have any comments or content to note?
I think I'd be happy to say that this is quite shocking. If you look at some of the slides, it's on page 101, where the number of people over 50 who are employed to provide this type of support on minimum wage is incredible.
Yeah, and some of what we heard earlier was worrying in relation to that as well. That's one I think we're going to have to keep a very close eye on. Okay, members, so moving then on to agenda item 8, SL1. The Registered Rents Increase Order NI 2024 on page 208. This proposed rule will allow for an increase of 7.7% to rents of protected and statutory tenancies for those properties that meet the housing fitness standard. This would represent an average weekly increase to £6 and 3 pence, of £6 and 3 pence. Do members have any comments in relation to this SL1?
No.
It's probably just asking how many protected and statutory tenancies does this actually affect, and how many of those are in receipt of housing benefit. Maybe it's probably for information purposes.
How many affected and how many in receipt of
housing benefit?
We can ask that back to the department.
Okay. If no other comments, are members content for the department to proceed to make the rule?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you, members. Correspondence item, members. Again, maybe in light of time we're at this week, we could do one of two things. We could either bring the entire correspondence list back, or if members had particular items they wanted to bring back, they could indicate by email to the clerk, and bring those back. Otherwise, we can. So, are members content to indicate to the clerk if there's particular items they want brought back onto the correspondence list for further discussion, rather than what's in the correspondence memo? So there are already a series of suggestions in the memo. So I'm asking members, do we bring it all back next week for time purposes, or are members content to indicate items that they want brought back?
I think it's better if anybody has any issues they indicate, rather than bring the whole lot back and regurgitate. Plus, next week could be a heavy agenda too. Suggested
items are noted there. If anybody has anything they wish to query in relation to the suggested actions, put them on the list to come back. Okay. That might finish up the whole list, or it might remove some of them. There might be some of them just straightforward. Okay.
Are you saying there's a time we would indicate that by, or do now?
When would you need that for, clerk?
By the end of Friday tomorrow.
Right, that's fine. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. So by the end of tomorrow for members to indicate. Thank you. Agenda item 10 then, members, forward work programme. You have a copy of it there, page 435. Have you any comments or any comment or issues on that? And if not, are members content to note? Yep, content to note, thank you. Agenda item 11, any other business? Do committee members have any other business today? Just members, can I check, given the expected timing of the forthcoming budget, would the committee be content to seek a further updated budget briefing from the Deputy Secretary with responsibility for finance to outline the department's realistic actual 2024-25 position as soon as possible?
Yes, please.
So I think there's a lot of members content with that. Yes, and then agenda item 12, before we go into our closed session with Raise, is date, time and location of the next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. here on Thursday, 25th of April, here in room 29 in Parliament Buildings. So the meeting is now adjourned. We'll take a short comfort break, and if members could come back in a few minutes there, 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, we'll get started into the Raise briefing. Thank you, members.
Committee room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 sound.